Get started. We will call our Finance Administration Committee meeting to order Wednesday, December 12th. I've got a few things up on the agenda tonight. First up is a public presentation. It's informational only, and it's regarding some info about the Tobacco 21 ordinance. So, Laura, if you want to kick that off.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Davis and Councilmember Thomas had asked to have this item put on for discussion purposes to see if there's council's interest in pursuing. Microphone. Do we have a microphone?
We'll see if it reaches.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the Tobacco 21 issue, and I know that we have Scott Hall with the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce here, who I believe you want to kick off with an initial presentation. Is that how you'd like to start this? And then I
think it's important to just give some of the background first.
Okay. And will that be in his presentation or?
No, we need probably in terms of how this was discussed before.
So I can, and if I miss something, please fill in the blanks for me. But back in the fall of 2015, the Shawnee Mission School District passed, I'm not going to get the terminology right. It's not a resolution, it's a statement of something, a statement of position or something actually on Tobacco 21, which would be a look at raising the legal buying age for tobacco products from 18 to 21, which would essentially then prohibit retail businesses from selling tobacco-related products to those under the age of 21. Possession and consumption would still be allowed and remain legal for persons between ages of 18 and 21. So that the school district took that position in the fall of 2015 and then encouraged all of the communities that were their constituents, if you will, or that fed into that school district to consider the passage of Tobacco 21 ordinances. So in December of 2015, that request was placed on a City Council committee agenda here in Mission for consideration. And at that time, the council decided not to take action to move a Tobacco 21 ordinance forward. And we have not had subsequent conversations since that time until the request was raised by Councilmember Davis and Thomas to reconsider.
And just real quick to add to that point, I think 3 years ago, I think it's noteworthy that the involved parties who were putting forward this initiative weren't contacted to speak or have an opportunity to present. So when I learned that, obviously I wanted to create an opportunity for the Tobacco 21 folks to present and move the conversation forward. On top of that, we've had a change in 4 council members and mayor, so I think it's worthy of revisiting, as 10 of the 14 Shawnee Mission School District constituent cities have passed it since that time.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Scott Hall, Senior Vice President for Civic and Community Initiatives at the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, here to talk to you tonight about a project that we have been working on at the Chamber for more than 3 years, Tobacco 21 KC, and we've done that work in collaboration with a great many partners across the Greater Kansas City metropolitan area. And really what we'd like to do today is to share with you a little bit of that story. I am not a tobacco cessation expert, but I have many of those folks who are experts here with me tonight that will share some of that scientific information. The first of them is Dr. Delvin Catley. Dr. Delvin Catley is a professor at the Department of Pediatrics at UMKC and with the Center for Children's Healthy Lifestyles and Nutrition at Children's Mercy Hospital and Clinics. And what I would say before Dr. Catley comes up and speaks on the scientific piece of what we're going to introduce to you tonight is that this is a piece of a broader project that the Chamber is undertaking to try and ensure that Greater Kansas City and all the cities within Greater Kansas City are destinations for health and wellness. And we feel like tobacco cessation and prevention is a key element of that, and we hear that from our members with some frequency. So Dr. Catley will come up and walk you through the first part of this.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I have to lift that a bit. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background to Tobacco 21, and the first of it. This is the basic idea. It's on the slide there, which is to make the sale and purchase of tobacco products, including alternative nicotine delivery devices and paraphernalia, limited to those 21 and over. And I want to make 2 points about this. As was mentioned earlier, the focus is on sale and purchase, right? Not on possession and use. And also the recommendation is to include alternative nicotine delivery devices at the same time. And as we go through our presentation, I think it'll become obvious why that is part of the recommendation for the initiative. So everybody knows in this day and age that tobacco products are harmful. So I won't belabor that, but I just want to reiterate, it really is a significant public health problem. Cigarettes are the only consumer product that, when used as intended, kills up to 1/3 of its regular users. And from a public health perspective, we have a tremendous amount of data indicating the societal costs. So, for example, the 2014 Surgeon General's report documented that tobacco products are costing nearly $300 billion in healthcare and lost productivity. And about 500,000 people die prematurely every year because of tobacco products. So even though tobacco use prevalence has gone down, it remains a significant public health and social problem. So switching to youth, which is the focus of this initiative, each day about 3,200 people under 18 smoke their first cigarette. Each day approximately 1,200 youth and young adults become daily smokers. So youth are still setting off on the path to becoming tobacco users and to those harmful health effects. And one thing that I think is important to note is that one of the ways young people get access to tobacco products, particularly in high school, is through their 18-year-old peers who have legal access to tobacco products. And what's really critical to understanding the value of Tobacco 21 is understanding the science behind adolescent brains. So we have epidemiological data that shows that 95% of current smokers, so the people that become long-term smokers, start before age 21. And research shows that those who have had their first cigarettes by age 18 are almost twice as likely to become these long-term smokers compared to people who start after 21. So there's something special about this period before age 21. So the epidemiological evidence is explained by lots of research that looks at nicotine addiction and the adolescent brain. And what we know is that human brains continue to develop until their mid-20s. But particularly in adolescence, executive functioning has not yet fully developed. And adolescents have poor abilities in decision-making, impulse control. They're very susceptible to sensation-seeking and peer pressure. So in other words, adolescents are not very good at thinking about their long-term health and futures. So that's one part, so they're vulnerable to starting. But the second piece is that because their brains are still developing at that stage, if they are in fact exposed to nicotine, this affects the actual development of their brain and they become more susceptible to addiction. Actually, addictions of all kinds. Animal studies show that adolescent rats become more susceptible to all kinds of addictions. So the epidemiological data matches what we know from animal studies. So in Kansas, youth and teen smoking is a little bit above the national average. It's 11% versus 9.2% for the US. And unfortunately, Kansas gets an F for tobacco prevention efforts from the American Lung Association. This is because they don't spend enough on proven tobacco prevention methods using the income that they get from tobacco products. And I just want to make this final point before I hand it back to Scott. Kids are being targeted by people who sell tobacco products. This is a picture. This happens to be cigarillos that are being sold. So this is a picture from a retail location in Mission, Kansas. And what you can see from this little picture of the products that are being sold is two things. Number one, they're being sold at a price that kids can afford. So deliberately, price is made low. It's 99 cents or even 2 for 99 cents. And then secondly, the products are marketed to kids in terms of, it looks like candy. It seems like candy. There are flavors that kids would like. So there's peach flavor, banana smash, cocoa blue. These are the kinds of things you wouldn't do if you were marketing to adults. So kids are being targeted. So let me hand it back to Scott.
So the Tobacco 21 movement began in Needham, Massachusetts, which is a city not all that different from Mission, a suburb of Boston, surrounded by other suburbs of Boston in all directions. And I'll refer you to this map because I want you to pay special attention to the cities you see there in yellow, in addition to the Needham, Massachusetts cities shown there. When Needham passed Tobacco 21 in 2005, it saw a dramatic decrease in teen smoking, from 13% to 7% over 5 years. And what's really meaningful about that is the 16 communities you see here in yellow did not pass Tobacco 21 and saw over that same period of time only a 20% decrease in smoking. So sometimes some of the tobacco cessation impact of T21 is credited to other public health policies that have been passed in recent years, and that is true, to be sure. But when you hold constant for T21, as was done here in the Needham example, what you'll see and what we see in other studies is that there's an approximation that teen smoking will reduce an average of about 25% if you pass Tobacco 21. That is even if all your neighboring communities do not pass the law. What's further interesting about Needham is that the positive health impact of passing Tobacco 21, some now many years ago, have endured. You can see that their rates for smoking are lower than the statewide average, smoking during pregnancy is lower than the statewide average, and lung cancer incidents are below averages as well. Here is why the Chamber of Commerce cares about Tobacco 21. The average cost to a private employer every year for every employee it has who uses tobacco is $5,816. Now, if you're Sprint and Cerner and one of these big companies, you can imagine that quickly comes to millions of dollars. But even for small businesses located here in Mission, Kansas, those are real dollars that become very, very meaningful very fast. If we have a workforce that is not addicted to tobacco, we will have a more productive, healthy, and more successful workforce. What's really interesting about this data is if you will look and see if I can take a look at where I'm pointing the laser, you'll see the pension benefit here, this number $296 is actually shown in parentheses because it's a credit. Because you don't pay as much in pension benefits to people who use tobacco because they die younger. So a lot of what we've said up to this point is about traditional tobacco products, but even since we began doing this presentation and passing Tobacco 21 ordinances across the metro, the dialogue around this issue has changed. And it has shifted in many respects away from traditional tobacco products now to electronic cigarettes. You can see e-cigarette use among high schoolers has exploded. You can see some of the numbers there. These are numbers from the CDC. And one statistic that I think is really interesting is in the Journal of Pediatrics in August of 2016, they measured that only 6% of teens were using electronic cigarettes in an attempt to quit traditional tobacco. That is not what these products are being used for, and you're going to hear it straight from some folks who really know. But before we get to them, let me show you how sometimes e-cigarettes are being delivered. Each of the products you see here on this slide looks like something it is not. That is not an inhaler or a pen or a hoodie or an Altoids can. Each of those are subversive electronic nicotine delivery systems. These are brought into schools. They are smoked or used sometimes in class. We are hearing this from teachers, from school administrators, and from students. Finally, Juul. Juul is the product of choice among young people in this sector. It looks like a flash drive. We have some here with us tonight that we'll show you so you can see what it looks like up close. It's very hard for a teacher in an English class in Shawnee Mission East High School to determine whether or not someone is holding a Juul or a flash drive. It's part of their popularity. They can be recharged in a USB port. Here you can see them again. We first started hearing about Juuls in the spring of 2017. The national media began covering Juuls and electronic cigarettes as an epidemic about 6 months to a year later. This article was written April 4th, 2017 in the Harbinger. The Harbinger is the student newspaper at Shawnee Mission East High School. We have two students here tonight with us. Carolyn Popper and Elizabeth Ballou. Carolyn's a junior and the assistant editor of print for the Harbinger. Elizabeth is a senior and the head copy editor at the Harbinger, and they're going to share a little bit of their experience.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm Carolyn. We also worked with Emily Faye on this project. She's our head editor, but she's holding down the fort at her newspaper's deadline tonight.
This fall, we wrote 3 stories on the Juul epidemic. One about Juul's marketing strategies and how it was appealing to teens. One about what our school was doing to combat the epidemic. And one about how Juul has grown to be an epidemic to a generation that was never supposed to be addicted to nicotine. Cigarette usage was down and was seen sort of in the teen population as not something cool and sort of gross. And e-cigarettes were sort of seen as nerdy. But then Juul came along and they have a sleek design that appeals to teens, which got them hooked. And 63% of e-students have tried a Juul, which is a number we conducted in our school survey.
Yeah, so this is the article that past editors wrote. Back then, they reached out to people they thought would at least know about the e-cigarette, but they found no one had heard of it. At that time, students were caravanning and carpooling down to Lawrence to buy the product because that's the only place it was being sold. And yeah, at that time, we saw students hitting their Juul in the back of classrooms or charging them on their MacBooks, and no teacher knew exactly what they were doing. It looks exactly like a USB. So.
Now teachers easily recognize the vape. Bathroom lines have become longer because each stall is filled with a group of students sharing a Juul. Without the buzz of the Juul, it can take 30 minutes for a student to get jittery, craving a hit. During the time of our first article, our vice principal confiscated 1 Juul. Now, he confiscates 1 Juul on average a day.
Between the 3 of us, we interviewed about 25 people, from class action lawsuit attorneys fighting cases against Juul, and directors of tobacco-free kids. We interviewed a lot of students claiming addiction, or at least obsession. One student wears a nicotine patch from Juuling, and once he was so desperate to get the pods, which is the nicotine cartridge in each Juul, he was so desperate for his pods that he paid a homeless man to go into a gas station to buy them for him. And another one, he is getting his wisdom teeth out, and they have a rule that you can't inhale through straws or suck through anything. So he inhaled the Juul through his nose. It's just the crave and the buzz is too much. So the typical Juul user follows a pattern, something like waking up, hitting your Juul, holding off until you get into the car on the way to school, sitting in your parking lot, hitting your Juul, and then going through frequent bathroom breaks to hit the Juul. And definitely before bed to calm the nerves.
When a group of chemistry students, I interviewed a girl, and her chemistry class actually tested a Juul pod cartridge to test for carcinogens to solve a class debate over whether the Juul is harmful. So the pod they tested positive for carcinogens, which isn't surprising considering the Juul isn't regulated by the FDA. But also keep in mind this is a chemistry classroom at a high school. This isn't like high-tech equipment, and we're easily able to detect carcinogens.
And a reason we thought that Juul's been able to get away with this for so long, become so successful, is their claim to be an anti-smoking product. It's meant for people trying to get away from cigarettes, but I mean, they have flavors called creme brulee and mango and a cool cucumber, and we just thought their marketing was clearly appealing to teens, or at least a youth market. And so they had to shorten some of the names to just creme or just cucumber to make it sound less trendy and less juvenile, but we haven't seen any shortage at school. What I also learned was the amount of nicotine in one hit or inhale of a Juul is equivalent to 10 puffs of a cigarette. So you think, why would there be more addictive chemicals in a product meant to cure addiction?
And it confirmed our idea that Juul had been marketing to young people the whole time. And an attorney we talked to told us that the Juul company did everything we could to create a youth epidemic. And in the weeks following of our article, Juul has shut down their social media accounts, suspended the selling of candy-flavored like pods, like mango or cucumber, and even lowered the level of nicotine from 5% to 3%. And we hope these changes will help curb the use of Juuls in our schools and prevent the epidemic from reaching the next generation. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. So this graph here illustrates the increase in the sale of Juul that has occurred in the last several years. You see that red line is the number of the units of Juul pods that have been sold, shown year over year. And then one other really interesting thing is electronic nicotine delivery devices are getting higher content levels, higher levels of nicotine in them. You can see here some data from the American Heart Association showing the percentage of nicotine in these devices year over year. And the green obviously is those devices that have 5 to 6% levels, blue 4 to 5%, red 2 to 4%, and yellow less than 2%. So we've been at work on this, as I said, for about 3 years as a coalition. When we started, there were about 45 cities across the United States and 1 state that had passed Tobacco 21 ordinances. Now there are 360 communities in 22 states and more than 89 million people in the United States that have passed this law. Here is a map of our greater Kansas City metro area. The blue cities are those cities or counties that have passed Tobacco 21 ordinances. You can see we had a presentation last night in Smithville. We are hopeful that that will turn blue shortly. This totals nearly 2/3 of the greater Kansas City metropolitan MSA. And one last thing I wanted to address, I don't have a slide on this, but just a little bit of data. There's a common misconception that if you don't smoke, that tobacco might not have anything to do with you. But I wanted to share some statistics that sort of run contrary to that. There's an enormous cost to the city of Mission, and frankly to all Kansans, from tobacco. The annual healthcare costs in Kansas directly caused by smoking are $1.12 billion. The Medicaid costs caused by smoking in Kansas every year are $237 million. The resident, state, and federal tax burden from smoking-caused government expenditures is $752 per household every year. This is a problem not just for those who smoke, or who use tobacco, or who use alternative nicotine delivery systems. It is a problem for all of us, even those who do not. We have some other experts here tonight. I don't know what your pleasure is to hear from them first, or if you'd like to do questions. We're happy to answer any questions that come from the council.
I think it would be helpful to have public health department
Sure.
speak, and I don't know if Nicole
Yeah.
can talk a little bit about the county and your efforts to the county.
Yes, Nicole Brown, Johnson County Department of Health and Environment, and we have been involved with this effort since it began in 2014-2015, primarily as a data resource, and we're available to the City of Mission and all the municipalities in our county as a resource. You know, if you need information, if we can answer questions, work as a liaison, you know, to help get information as you guys might need it. I'll try not to repeat, we've gotten a lot of great information so far, but just a couple of other things. When you're looking at youth, especially that are using Juul, as part of the National Youth Tobacco Survey, what we also found is that a lot of youth did not really realize that Juuls had nicotine in them, and it's such a highly addictive substance. So it's just one more thing that's happening. They're becoming addicted to something they didn't realize that was a possibility. And what we're also finding is a lot of these youth that start using Juul or similar devices are going on to try traditional tobacco products as well. So, you know, they're becoming dual users and just further compounding the future health risks. I think we might hear from someone from the Shawnee Mission School District here in a minute, but you know, I had a really interesting experience a few weeks ago. I am on the Wellness Committee for the Shawnee Mission School District. And what's really terrific about that group is they have some youth representation as well. There's middle school and high school students. And hearing their comments, much like the students from East tonight, was really fascinating to me. They're all very savvy about the policy environment in Johnson County. You know, they know exactly where policies are in place and where they aren't. You know, the kids are just really are knowledgeable about who they can go to get products, and are good at figuring that out. The other thing is that, you know, each year we do community health assessment, and we participate with the Kansas Health Department on assessment. And what we find in Johnson County among adults is that half of all the smokers in Johnson County try to quit smoking each year. You know, so they create a habit when they're young, and it's a habit that takes years and multiple attempts to stop. And so when you have 50% of our smokers in the county trying to stop using these products each year, it's a very difficult lifestyle change to make. And so really, probably one of the best things we can do is, you know, try to prevent the start of use in the first place. So, you know, these policies do a great job. Our sign-on rate, which is the compliance rate for retailer selling, for Kansas is about 90%. You know, I just got a report today that says overall our retailers do a good job of enforcing these laws. They want to be a good citizen. We haven't heard a lot from other communities in Johnson County that they're having trouble with implementing and enforcing these policies. You know, so I don't really have a lot to add besides that, but I just wanted to let you know that we're here as a resource. We're happy to help in any way. You know, please let us know if there's anything we can do to help with your efforts. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is John McKinney. I am the Director of Family and Student Services for the Shawnee Mission School District. For 18 years prior to that, I worked at Shawnee Mission East High School, and for a couple before that at Trail Ridge Middle School. So the last 20 years of my life have been spent with 14 to 18-year-olds. So you'll have to forgive me if I wander off occasionally. I want to reiterate what the students shared. I was principal during the time when that article was written, and I know those student journalists very well. And I want to applaud them and their efforts to better educate not only their own students, but their community as a whole. The Shawnee Mission School District and Scott asked me to reiterate and to reread the Statement of Position of Health and Well-Being from the Shawnee Mission School District. The Shawnee Mission Board of Education believes all students, staff, parents, and patrons should strive to maintain healthy lifestyles. The Shawnee Mission Board of Education recognizes and appreciates recent actions taken by the governing bodies of Kansas, Missouri, Kansas, Kansas, and others to increase the legal age for purchase of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and smokeless tobacco, to age 21. The Shawnee Mission Board of Education hereby encourages governing bodies of the 14 Johnson County municipalities served by the Shawnee Mission School District to consider increasing the legal age for purchase of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and smokeless tobacco, to age 21. Thus, the Shawnee Mission School District fully supports a change in the legal age for the purchase of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and smokeless tobacco, to the age 21. And as a former principal and now district administrator at Central Office, I would certainly reiterate that request and encourage you to make that change. Happy to answer any questions if any come up, but thank you.
We have one other person, Tracy. Do you want to talk a little bit about the current case in Topeka, Shawnee, and the status of that, along with your own organization?
Sure, thank you. I'm Tracy Russell. I'm the State Government Relations Director for the American Heart Association. I just wanted to give a real brief kind of state perspective on this. Of course, this area has been the leader around T21, but we actually have 23 Kansas communities that have adopted this so far, covering 900,000 Kansans, so we're very excited about that. And that includes Topeka, which we passed a year ago, right about this time, and that is the one that has been challenged in court. It is pending with the state Supreme Court right now, and it was challenged under Home Rule authority. Several groups, and I'm going to let Scott talk to this in more detail, have signed on to amicus briefs in support of Topeka's ordinance. And I think it's also important to know that the State Attorney General also believes that the City of Topeka acted within their Home Rule authority. We do not have a scheduled date yet for hearings on that case. We're hoping it will be very soon. I can tell you we've had 4 communities pass T21 since that time. None have been challenged as a result of that, and we're not expecting any challenge since it is resting with the state Supreme Court now.
I think that's pretty much it in terms of our presentations. This has been put on the agenda today for review by this council, or committee I should say, whether it should be moved forward and asking the staff to essentially develop an ordinance. I do believe that a lot has changed in the last 3 years in terms of the information as well as in terms of the communities that have adopted this type of ordinance. And at this point in time, we are one of 3 or 4 municipalities in Johnson County that has not adopted this. And I do believe that it's time for us to go ahead and move forward on this. I know that there's not unanimous view on this, but this is at least a time for us to discuss whether it warrants to be moved forward or not. And so with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay. Well, I think we can open it up for any discussion. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to comment on this issue at all? Let's start there and see if anyone else has anything. If you could just please state your name for the record.
Sure. My name is Ginny Chadwick. I'm with the Preventing Tobacco Addiction Foundation, or tobacco21.org. I'm the Western Regional Director for the organization. So as Scott mentioned, we have some toys here for you to see. So we're not just talking about them, but you're actually seeing them. This is a Juul pod. So it looks truly like a thumb drive. When you charge it, you stick it into your USB port. These packs are about $15.99 for a box of 4. Every pod contains as much nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes. So the liquid in the pod is there. Once you put it in, it's ready. This is mango. It's the most popular flavor for the youth. So I'm going to pass it around, and you might want to smell it. I wouldn't inhale it. So nicotine is obviously, it's a stimulant, it's a drug, it's highly addictive. It's as addictive as heroin or cocaine, right? And so what we want to do is we want to raise the saleage of tobacco products. We want to go after the retailers who are making a profit off of selling a deadly addictive substance to our youth, right? And so I'm here to answer any questions about the national movement. As Scott said, we've passed in its 375 local policies across the country in 22 states, and have 6 statewide policies. So it's moved incredibly fast since it first started. I was the original bill sponsor in the area, so I was on the Columbia City Council, and I voted to pass Tobacco 21 back in 2014. So we were the 31st city in the nation to pass it, and thanks to Kansas City, they took it up very shortly after, and it has just spread like wildfire in the area, and we're so proud of that.
I have one question.
Yeah?
Do you know, just by any chance, how much a pack of cigarettes costs in contrast to the 4 Juul pods?
Yeah, so somebody in Kansas might be more familiar with the Kansas state cost. Missouri, we have the lowest tobacco tax in the nation, just across the border. So you can typically buy a pack of cigarettes for about $5. So you're actually, yeah, do the math. Right, for kids. You know, the device typically costs about $20. I have seen them buy one, get one free at gas stations across the street from high schools.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to all of those who came out tonight to speak and took the time of your evening to be with us tonight. We appreciate it. If you have any questions as a committee.
I think there are a few other people from the audience that maybe want to get up and speak on this. Maybe not. Someone raised their hand. I didn't know if they wanted to come up. Yep. And if you could just come up and say your name first for the records.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, so I'm Olivia Boster. I'm with Resist and the Teen Task Force. And I'm offering a unique perspective because I'm also 18 years old, and I see how this is like affecting my community and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to be advocating for Tobacco 21. And so basically I see how this affects like teens throughout all over. So at with the Resist program, I've been doing a lot of advocacy work within my school and in our community. We did a program at my school called Escape the Vape, where we literally had kids turn in vapes without faculty involvement. And we had about 35 kids come forward and anonymously turn in e-cigarettes. And as you've probably heard, that this is a rather large population of kids are starting to use e-cigarettes. And it's kind of scary to think in my grade alone, about 85 kids have tried it or use it on a regular basis, that you don't really know who's addicted. And when I joined the Teen Task Force last year, when my principal noticed we had a problem at our school, and before that I didn't even know what a vape was, yet alone how they worked and what the components were of it. But ever since I started, I found that no matter if it's a cigarette or if it's one of these Juul pods, they're all bad. And to be able to walk into a gas station and be bombarded with ads and all that now that I'm 18 I could make the decision to buy. I know kids who are freshmen who are getting addicted and who can use 3 pods a day. I know a sophomore who goes through 4 a day because they can't stop. And I believe that with the Tobacco 21, raising the age kind of helps kids, even in middle school, just kind of be I don't have as easy access to it. I can't go to a high school senior and buy it off of them. I can't find a way to, because most middle schoolers don't know college students who could buy it for them unless they have older siblings. So it kind of finds a way to get it out of their hands. It finds a way to kind of help freshmen and sophomores not be able to get it as easily, and it's not as readily available. And when you take away that aspect of making them available, kids can focus better in school. Kids don't get addicted to nicotine at such a young age, where it's going to continue into adulthood and continue to impact their lives, and have that little Juul device or other e-cigarettes control them. I know a kid at my school, well, he transferred, but who said that he transferred our school because of how much e-cigarettes was around him. He didn't want that to influence him. He wanted to make friends and go to parties without there being separation of 2 groups between him and a couple friends who weren't drinking or doing e-cigarettes, to the group that went around, sat in a circle, and shared Juuls. There needs, we found that when the age is raised, that kids don't find ways to get a hold of it. And it just kind of helps them really I know many kids don't think about their health. I know I didn't. But personally, in my own life, my brother tried it. Luckily, I have parents who kind of read over all my speeches and stuff like that, and come to hear me talk at my school or the middle schools we present at, and they were notice the signs within my brother, and they were able to find where he had hidden it, and he just bought it off of his friend who was 18. And I know my brother personally doesn't know anyone who's 21 who would be able to buy it for him if Tobacco 21 was passed. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this? Any other comments from the council?
Just to let you know, I did talk to Deb Settle from Northeast Chamber, and she could not be here tonight, but she wanted me to advise the council that she's in support of this policy and adopting the policy.
That's who you're saying that's inadmissible.
And I also know Kevin is here. I don't know if yes, he is. He's not going to.
Well, I've got comments.
Go ahead, Ken.
We've certainly heard from a lot of the proponents for the 21 legislation or whatever, but who are the opponents to it? I mean, it hadn't passed the state, apparently, because it's not a law in the state. So who are the opponents to this that are keeping it from passing the state, and why haven't we heard from them?
I don't know about the state level. I can speak for myself. I think that any kind of law that restricts legal adults from legally being able to do things that other legal adults can do, without a whole lot behind it, there are more effective ways that have been proven to actually cut down on smoking use, and especially amongst youth.
Yeah, I would think education would be...
Education, taxation, and some other things that can be put in place. But I personally can't support something that's going to, all it's going to do is prohibit legal adults from doing illegal activity that other legal adults can do. And it's not so much about the tobacco usage for me. I'm not debating that tobacco has huge public health impacts and that it's becoming a problem with all the e-cigarettes. I think that's pretty clear. It's the precedent that it sets when government says that we know better than you and we're going to tell you that you can't do something because we know better. And I think that's a really dangerous way to go when we're setting policy. So I just can't support it.
The other thing is, I heard from several people talking about what goes on in a high school as far as kids being able to access these things because it's legal to buy them when they're 18.
Yeah.
And if they just would raise it to 21, then they wouldn't be able to get them. However, having a couple of high school age grandkids and having had kids that went through high school myself, I know that they can access almost any kind of illegal drug at high school. They can access ecstasy, pot, coke, all kinds of things.
And to that point, one of the things that jumped right off the page to me, in the statistics that were provided to us through this, is that 90% of people start smoking before they're 18 years old already. And there already are laws in place to prevent that. It's illegal, they still do it. So
Yet
changing that just
80%
makes it more
high school
illegal.
students turn 18 their senior year of high
Sure.
school. So I feel like that's kind of a moot point because they can easily pass.
So why not 19 then?
Why not 30?
Why not 30?
Well,
Never.
the studies...
And the bigger question is what's next, right? And that's the problem that I have with this whole thing is what's next.
It's not the use that's up for debate. It's not a ban or a prohibition. No, it's the sale within the use.
You're trying to restrict the use by restricting the sale.
And there are more effective ways to restrict the use. There are. Taxation.
I'm sorry, I think we're hearing from the best experts in Kansas City.
TobaccoFreeKids.org is a website that has all kinds of information about this, and they say very clearly that the best way to cut down on tobacco use, especially amongst youth, is by raising tax rates and funding education programs to help youth.
I think we've been doing that for the past 20, 30 years.
And that's why the rates are dropping.
And that's why when you hear when Needham, Massachusetts dropped by 46% over their time period, what it doesn't tell you is places like the state of Minnesota over that same time period dropped by over 55% without changing any of those laws because of things like taxing, education, and other policies that don't restrict legal adults from doing legal things.
Mr. Chairman, can we go by order of who's requesting to speak?
Sure.
Yeah, I just had sort of a counterpoint to that. I found the information in our packet from the speakers about the social network evidence to be pretty persuasive, and that if you have a large group, like 80% of high school students who can legally purchase right now and can be a distribution network in their high schools, I find that very persuasive in terms of access. Sure, people can always get things that are illegal, but in terms of quantity and in terms of social acceptance and everything, I think that does play a big role. And I would agree that there are other proven public health mechanisms to reduce tobacco usage, and I think if the council feels strongly about that, we're discussing our legislative agenda later tonight, and we should also consider including that in our city legislative platform, that we'd like to see the state properly spending its tobacco money on prevention. But I don't think that precludes considering something like Tobacco 21.
I think we got someone from the audience that would like to speak. You can say your name for us too.
Sure, Ned Kelly, Wyandotte County Libertarian Party. And thanks for letting me speak out of order. I know you'd already had questions from the audience. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, I was just coming to observe. But just to add to the voice of opposition, I thought somebody should stand up a little bit, just to show that there isn't a unanimous thought in the audience. So, yeah, I mean, prohibition of any kind has never worked. Prohibition of any kind, any age, only creates a black market. Prohibition of any kind only increases the opportunity for individuals to find better, easier to access vices. So if it does in any way stop people who are 18, 19, and 20 years old from using tobacco, that means they're going to find some other vice, probably what most of us would consider worse for them, a worse drug of choice, probably. If you think about what are 18-year-olds allowed to do, old enough to vote, old enough to join the military, kill, die, foreign soil, old enough to pay taxes, old enough to star in an X-rated movie. Not old enough to choose what substance to put in your own body. Doesn't make sense to me. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I have a comment, and it may not fall well, but I'm not anti-smoke, anti-tobacco. In fact, Mission adopted, one of the first cities that adopted no smoking in restaurants and businesses and things. My bigger concern is all the comments that have been made about addictive behavior. And I don't know if the 3-year gap's going to solve that. But we have some serious things to consider when we're looking at all these kids addicted to something. Somewhere down the line, our tax money needs to be paying to get these kids help. And to me, it starts at home. I don't know what their families are doing. It's not a blame or a judgment as much as it is just an awareness of how many kids, if they can't get one thing, they need to get something else. What's happened to us as a society that all these kids need something extra? I mean, that's a bigger issue to me than whether this goes through or doesn't go through, and there's a 3-year gap that says they can buy it, they can't. The buying doesn't seem to be the problem, it's the use of it. What are we going to do as a society, at least in the city of Mission, to deal with that? That seems as important, if not more, than who can buy it and who can't. Buying probably is the first step. But what happens after they buy it and they continue? Schools and teachers are limited in how much discipline and things they can do with kids. But if the kids are using the Juul in class, that's a big concern to me. It really is. Maybe even more so than what happens with Tobacco 21. That's a first step. But I have a real concern after hearing from health professionals, chambers, citizens, and kids. We have a big problem here, people. Besides opioids, it looks like it just triggers down, and there's more and more problems with people getting addicted to things. You know, when I grew up, my parents both smoked. I never smoked in my life. Never want to. And I think smoking's kind of looked at as kind of a bad habit, if you will, collectively for a lot of people. I'm really worried about these kids. I have 5 kids, none of them smoke. It just, I don't know if it has anything to do with pattern or what they saw or what they want to be. But I see a much bigger problem just in this collective audience that was addressed besides whether we pass this or not. So just a comment.
I was just going to say, I think one point about the Juuls in particular that we heard from the students is that they can be highly covert. So it's not the same, you know, as if your kid has a drinking problem, that might be something that's easier to see, you know, as in terms of why this is an increasing problem.
I don't know about that. I mean, there's ways that people can hide that, you know,
Sure.
vodka in a water bottle
Little tiny
also
stick is
kind of
pretty
blends
easy.
in.
Yeah, no, but Jules.
I mean, it's a good point. There's absolutely a problem there, right? I don't think any of us debate that.
Right.
To me, this is about the precedent that it sets and the fact that if we vote for this, we are telling legal adults that we know better than them, and we're going to tell them they can't do things because we know better, and government needs to step in there. And I have a very, very big concern with what that leads to and where that goes in the future and what's next after that.
I agree with that.
So, sorry if this was already said in there, but does this policy speak to anything about sales online?
No, it doesn't.
So I am in agreement that tobacco is bad for anybody, whatever age. And I think that we should do something, and I'd like to do something about the online stuff. But the fact that there's no online piece for this, and then there's no evidence showing or data showing that it's effective. And they said that we have a great F in Kansas for the money or the lack of money we spend for prevention. I'd like to spend more money towards prevention and make those moves, but I just don't see them in this policy.
Well, I would advocate for us to go ahead and direct the staff to develop an ordinance along these lines. There is evidence, there's been evidence in other communities that it is effective. It is focused on basically 6 or 5 businesses that are currently selling tobacco products in the community. It probably affects about 600 youth.
Did you invite those businesses to this meeting?
Well, those businesses can come to the meeting when it's actually part of the discussion for the ordinance itself.
Just like we
I
did
did
the
not
NDO.
invite-
Just like the NDO.
I did not invite the businesses here. I did check
Well,
with
you invited other people, that's what.
I did, yes, I
Invited
did.
the proponents of it, but not the people who might be
Well,
interested.
but the fact is that the stakeholders that are affected are going to be invited in the future to come speak to the ordinance. But what I would like to see this committee do is to move the issue forward and to actually draft legislation that then we can look at and adopt.
I'd like to see us hold off on it until this
Supreme Court.
one Supreme Court case is decided. That would give us a little help with that as far as knowing what.
My question is, if that court case is found favorable for Topeka, would you still oppose it?
I'd probably still oppose, but
So that's just
I'd be
a delay
okay with
tactic.
bringing it
So it's
forward.
just a delay tactic.
No.
I would say let's
If
adopt
it's
it.
found the other way, wouldn't you?
To be fair on that, we have a lot of priorities and we are short-handed with staff right now. So maybe at the very least, we should wait and find out if that's something that's even going to be a viable thing that could be done before we have staff spend time on that. And then we can bring it back at that time.
Well, I would like to take a poll of support or not support.
I have one quick point. Could we hear from the chamber perhaps that there are model ordinances, and obviously there are many, many
Sure there
cities around us in terms of staff resources. Do you guys have materials?
There are, there are model, we said we're one of, 3 or 4 in Johnson
Who
County.
haven't done it, right?
We know that we know there are ordinances that can be modeled out there.
Which, I'll be honest, as Councilmember Davis and I looked at bringing this presentation, of course we didn't bring opponents because it's a presentation about Tobacco 21. But as we looked at this, a number of people that I talked to were saying, is this really going to be an issue? Is this really something that you're going to get backlash on? I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that from professionals in the field. And it's troubling to me what this headline reads. That Mission isn't willing to be a leader on this. We weren't able to be a leader on this 3 years ago. And here we are, having an opportunity to be one of the final cities to get this in. I don't want to be the last. And that's my 2 cents. I'm a mom. I want to know that my city leaders, myself included, are doing everything possible. As I think about my daughter and sending her to public schools, this is a decision that makes me think, I don't know if I want to send her to Shawnee Mission schools. If this is what she's going to be experiencing, and her city leaders, Really, I mean, these are things people's parents think about, that I think about. And so I want to know that the city I live in is taking steps to address what our kids are facing. And I think we heard it pretty clear tonight.
And I would like to know that the city I live in is willing to step up and protect the legal rights of legal adults in this community. And to not do that, I think, is the most problematic thing that we could be doing. And I'm all for finding creative, other ways that are proven to work to help curb tobacco uses, especially amongst youth, and pushing for that. But I'm not okay with restricting, me personally, can't speak for everyone else, I'm not okay with restricting the rights of legal adults to consume legal products that other legal adults can consume. And likewise for legal businesses to sell legal products to legal adults.
And do you not
I don't think that's government's
I can definitely
place
appreciate that an 18-year-old has the right to use cigarettes, e-cigarettes, and that's not something we're prohibiting. We are saying Mission does not stand for selling cigarettes to 18 to 21-year-olds. I think there's a serious difference there. And beyond that, there's many things you cannot do at 18. There's many things you can't do.
Why don't you consider not selling cigarettes at all in Mission?
I prefer that. If you want to have that conversation, let's go there.
I don't think
it's fair, though, to say that just because we don't support this way, that we don't support anyway. I mean, I'm a mom too, and I fall on both sides of the line. I have an 18-year-old brother who is freshly enlisted into the Navy, and he can vote, he can fight for our country, but he's not going to be able to, and he's not a smoker, but I'm just saying that those restrictions, I don't think it's really going to tackle the issues, all of the issues. And if we want to go down this path, I would support certain things, but I don't think it's fair to say that just because we don't support this policy in the form that it is now, to say that we're not thinking of.
It's the online component
It's many things. I mean, it is, like I said, I'm on both sides. It's the fact that my brother can vote, pay taxes, and fight for his country, but he can't buy cigarettes. And even though he can consume them and possess them or whatever, it's that, and there's no. I'm a numbers-driven person, and I just would like to see. I would like to see more out of it. I feel like it's not.
One of the articles that is included in the packet speaks to that in terms of the military. The military is trying to actually reduce tobacco use.
They're not doing it by restricting the sale to 18.
I think that
they're not. You can buy cigarettes at 18 on any military base, anywhere in the world.
That's not what the packet says. That's not what the leaders. The materials in our packet said that in areas where tobacco 21 has passed, there are bases who are following, in line with that and are in favor of the tobacco 21 policy. It's in the material.
Yeah, so actually in 2015 when Hawaii passed it statewide, we weren't sure what the federal military bases would do, and we actually held our breath wondering if they would comply. And 2 days before Tobacco 21 was enacted in Hawaii, the federal military bases made a very bold statement. They said, we want our young men and women who are serving our country to be combat ready. And that means not serving a life of addiction of tobacco. And we will absolutely be applying Tobacco 21 on all of our federal military bases in areas where Tobacco 21 is put in place. If 50% of our young men and women who served our country died from serving our country, we would think twice about letting an 18-year-old serve our country. 50% of tobacco users will die of a tobacco-related illness. As far as data, we have studies. We have studies out of Chicago. We have studies out of California, places that have passed Tobacco 21, all showing a reduction in tobacco prevalence rates. We have the Institute of Medicine. It's a 500-page report showing the reduction of 25% for youth initiation. So the evidence is out there if you need more of it. As far as online sales, that one's a difficult one. That actually has to be addressed by the federal government. And then states have tried to put restrictions in place, but even that is really hard to enforce. I've seen some local communities put online restrictions in place in their local policies. You know, it's hard to catch at a state, a local level, the online sales, but it's something that the FDA is trying to restrict. You know, they're trying to put more identification in place. Juul has made a clear statement that they are not selling online to anybody under the age of 21. So, believe it or not, the industry does support it. Tobacco 21 often, they've made statements, Altria has made statements, Juul has made statements that they do support Tobacco 21. And there are other evidence-based measures that do reduce tobacco use. Education, right? So education and cessation, yep. They reduce community prevalence by 10%. Marketing campaigns at high levels, we're talking about like the TIPS campaign, they reduce community prevalence by 10%. Taxation, as you guys have mentioned, and in the state of Kansas, you probably have the legal authority to put taxation in place. And in Kansas, every Tobacco 21 policy that's passed has included a tax bill as well to help fund enforcement. So you could increase the tax, and at the same time, you could raise the age to 21, and you could use that money to enforce the policy. So just an idea, but tax reduces community prevalence by 18%, and the evidence shows that Tobacco 21 reduces community prevalence by 12%. So just some things that I'm hearing to help clarify.
And why just 21?
Why just 21? That's a really good question, so I'll answer that too. So the Institute of Medicine did a study, the predictive modeling study. They actually looked at 19, they looked at 21, and they looked at 25. So when you say why not 19, so 80%.
Why not 25 or 30?
Yeah. So 80% of our seniors are 18 before they graduate. 20% are actually 19 before they graduate. So it doesn't move that social circle out of the high school. So why not 25? So what they found based on research was because 95% start before the age of 21, moving it up to 25 doesn't actually make that big of a difference on reduction of prevalence. Why not ban the sale of tobacco? So I actually just sat into a presentation by the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, the Public Health Law Center out of Minnesota, and I think a lot of the data that you were saying in anti-support of Tobacco 21 actually came from Minnesota. I was surprised that it made its way down here. But it did, so you're getting Minnesota data. They did a presentation on can you legally ban the sale of tobacco products in your community. You can. There's no federal law that prohibits it. I don't believe there's any state statute that would prohibit it, but no community has ever done it. So when you look at why 21, well, 375 communities said that this is a good age. Because it's really about that brain development. And we know the brain's not fully developed until the age of 25. And so by moving it to 21, yeah, by moving it to 21, you know, most people start before the age of 21. So that's why.
Are you trying to work with the state legislature on trying to go ahead and just eliminate non-usage of any tobacco products until the age of 21? I mean, besides just purchasing, I mean, it sounds like you ultimately would like nobody under 21 to even use or have access to tobacco or nicotine products. I mean,
So we work on raising the sale age of tobacco products from 18 to 21, and as I mentioned, 6 states across the nation have passed that. But last legislative session in 2018, being this year, 29 states actually proposed legislation to raise the sale age from 18 to 21. It passed in Massachusetts. So every year we've had 1 or 2 states pass since we've started introducing the policy. I would say that this legislative session coming up, 2019, it'll probably pass in Minnesota. So they've been working on it for a while. This will be the 3rd year it's introduced, and they actually have a lot of local policies now. So we've never passed a statewide policy without a lot of local movement, meaning that there's a lot of local policies and a lot of local community behind it to say we want the state to do this. And so if we talk about, are we going to propose a statewide policy? I think that you could talk to the statewide folks to hear what their intent is, but it often bubbles up from the local community.
I think the bigger question there that maybe didn't come across right is, correct me if I'm wrong, is why not go after curbing the use of people 18 to 21 years old? The use of tobacco by people 18 to 21 years old as well, if you're also going to restrict the purchase.
Because if you've got this online presence, to be honest with you, I don't know. Kids do everything online as far as it's pretty much. I don't see by having 5 places that Mission currently, I believe, sells tobacco products. I don't see how that's going to be that great if we just, I'm just It's not inviting to it.
Also, if it was brought up in 29 states and only two or three of them passed it, what happened?
One passed it.
6 passed so far.
Last year,
Right,
you said it was brought up in 29 states last year and one passed.
So bills
So
were
you
filed.
just wrote it down, so.
Bills were filed in 29 states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It often
So-
passes at a state level after there's many local policies.
No, I understand, but
Yeah.
to your point, the 29 states, the bills were filed last year, one of them passed.
Right, so there is stiff opposition somewhere to it, but we
Yeah.
didn't get that side of it.
And the vapor industry and the tobacco industry, obviously, yeah, is in opposition. Anybody who's going to lose sales off of this, right? But we know that the 18 to 20-year-old only purchases 2% of sales, but they're the long-term purchasers, right? The tobacco industry knows that they have to addict young. Nobody starts after 21, right? So they have to addict young in order to have a lifelong addict or user, because if they don't get them young, they won't start.
In fact, I think the data shows in our packet, again, 90% of people that smoke started smoking before they were 18, and it's currently illegal to purchase or use before you're 18. So raising that to 21, the age to 21 to buy,
Now you have under the
I had a point to address, and perhaps for the public health experts ask, but my understanding, Kristen, and they can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that the reason why not to criminalize use, so make the use or possession illegal, is that that's currently not consistent with harm reduction policies for any sort of addictive substance. So, there are a lot of people who think that the use and possession of other addictive drugs should not actually be criminal, and that should only be the sale, and that's where you should be controlling. So my guess is that is probably part of where that's coming from as well.
Okay.
Let me just jump in, if I might, because I know we are now an hour and 40 minutes into a very long meeting night. There's obviously a lot of discussion and passion around this issue. What I might suggest is that we haven't had a city council work session in a long time. And this might, just from the content of the discussion, that perhaps rather than trying to advance it back on a committee agenda, we look at a work session opportunity so that we can schedule that time. We're not conflicting with other agenda items, and we can kind of then have the opportunity to pull together additional information that may be requested to kind of facilitate that discussion and really be best prepared for that.
I would prefer that at least we have a polling of what the current stance is on this group, because if we're just postponing it, that's really not the solution.
Well, I think having more time to work through it and decide if people want to move it forward, I would agree with Laura that a work session is a better solution than trying to, with people wanting to get to the other 47 items on our agenda than trying to, pull an answer now. But
it's up to you. You can, if you want to take a poll, you can do that as well. But I think the work session setting, out of respect for the other things, and honestly, the value of this conversation, it probably makes some sense.
I would like to see us attack it from raising our grade from an F and I'd like to throw money at the prevention piece than spending anything at just.
That is prevention. That is prevention.
Education, so you're saying that we have an F because we sell at legal age?
Most of the cities around here.
Every other state
a lot of
does
cities
use
around
it.
here.
Prevention is raising taxes on it.
So
prevention is.
All right.
To Laura's point, I think we should look to do. We should table it until we can have a city council work session on this. Personally, I don't think that we should spend any staff time yet until we find out what happens with Topeka. I would, just with all the other stuff that I know staff has on their plate, I would like to put that off until we at least find out what happens with Topeka, and at that point we can maybe revisit this. But that would be my stance on that. And if we need to go around and get everyone else's opinion on it, great. But I think that we're kind of at the point where we need to move on to something other than another.
I would agree with that.
I feel good about a work session. I think moving ahead that way makes sense.
So I think I hear everybody say work session, so we're down to work session before or after a Supreme Court decision, if I'm understanding where I think the conversation is at this point. Right?
I'd say after.
I'd say
we want to know
before.
what happens with that.
Do we want to go in a circle starting somewhere?
Sure. Go ahead, Hillary, kick us off.
Yep, work session before. I think we can always hold off on implementing the ordinance until after the Supreme Court decision, but we can definitely move forward.
Second.
I would also agree with that, doing it now, and like Hillary said, we could wait to implement until after the court decision. That could be part of our discussion.
I'd like a work session after we hear something from the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, I think
said
you were
no.
already agreeing with her, right?
Work session after.
Work session now.
Work session after.
We got a tie. So does that go to the mayor? I mean,
No.
There's no scientific way to do this, right?
You're the chairman.
So which part doesn't move forward?
Well, I think the
Why
work
is that
session
the way
makes
it
sense.
works?
I think a work session makes sense too, but I think
But I don't think that the timeline is such that we need to wait until the next decision.
I don't know where we go from here then, because we've got a split on the council on that.
Do we have a policy that
Is
is
there any
just
guidance
for?
on what those next steps
Deadlock?
would
What is our
be? Rock,
policy?
paper,
Man,
scissors, flip coin?
you're kind of stuck until somebody moves in one direction or another.
I mean, I think if there's already legislation being held up on whether or not Topeka's even going to be able to lawfully move forward with it, it doesn't do us any good to spend any staff time or resources to.
Legislation is not being held up, it's just a decision.
Sorry, Supreme Court decision,
A
court
decision
decision
on a case.
on Topeka's legislation, yes.
Not
Sorry, I worded that incorrect. You're right. So.
So we just sit here and stare at
I
each
think
other?
No, I think we have to move on to the next agenda item. And,
I was waiting
I
to
think
start over again and come around. I can start on this end. But I think it'd be better to do it after, because then you have more information for the work session. You know what happened with that case. Otherwise, we're gonna be bringing it up again at the
A comment from an old person here. Do we have anything else subject to work session activity that this could go in concert with? So do we have anything else coming up for a work session, so we wouldn't have one just on this issue? And that way we could put this into it.
we could very well. I mean, I
Consensus to put this in a work session.
But there's no consensus not to either.
Well, I think there's consensus to put it in a work session. Just when the timing of that is, I don't know.
Well, I think the decision is expected first quarter, so would it be reasonable to say that we have a work session sometime in maybe late first quarter? So there's at least a timeline attached to what we're talking about, and it's not just indefinitely out there.
Yeah, and if they don't get it done for whatever reason, we'll still do our work.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay.
See, you can compromise.
Okay, so why don't we bring back, we'll look at some date options, and next week at your council meeting, we'll provide some options, and the council can select a work session date late in the first quarter of 2019. Okay?
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Motion to adjourn. No, I'll be right back.
Thank you to everyone who came.
Take 5 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and then we'll move on to it.
I don't know, certainly. Okay, I do want to ask the public health people though, if I'm about my Harvard. I think that's true. Which one? And I'm not.
We'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order. So the next item up on our agenda is an action item to review the non-discrimination ordinance that was discussed at our last meeting. So Laura, you can update us on that?
Yes, absolutely. So both at the October 3rd and the November 14th committee meetings, the council has considered and discussed proceeding with an ordinance related to non-discrimination that would provide uniform legal protection within Mission, prohibiting discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodation on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, disability, marital status, familial status, or military status. And in addition, it would outline a complaint and enforcement process, as would any other ordinance. Prior to our November 14th committee meeting, we did mail a postcard to all of our licensed businesses and all of those in our rental licensing database to advise them that this conversation was moving forward. We heard some of that this evening. It is our regular practice that when we're going to discuss an item and we think it's coming forward, that we will advise the impacted stakeholder groups and invite them to come participate in that conversation. We created a reference page on the website, which included an FAQ on non-discrimination ordinances and a link trying to gather up all of our packet materials. In addition, we created an online comment form that allowed interested residents or businesses who may not be able to come and participate at the committee meeting the opportunity to provide feedback on the non-discrimination ordinance. The council also took public comment at both the October and the November committee meetings, and those are reflected in the committee minutes. The overwhelming majority of the comments received both in person and via email through the website did support the continued consideration and adoption of a non-discrimination ordinance. So when we left the November 14th meeting, council directed staff to move forward, finalizing a draft ordinance and bring that back as an action item on this evening's agenda. In your packet, you had a redlined version of the ordinance that was in the November 14th committee packet. I tried to, in the action item summary, outline in the table those sections and those items which I would consider to be more housekeeping in nature. So I think everyone's aware that both the cities at Prairie Village and Merriam are considering non-discrimination ordinances at the same time. So we've been talking and communicating and collaborating about what's included in that. And so, and stealing from one another, because that's what we do. But looking at these, so those sections which were included as redlined comments, so either strike through or underlined in the ordinance, were really opportunities where I think the language, we had the opportunity to kind of tighten up the language or provide some additional clarity in the draft ordinance that had been presented. I'm happy to answer any questions on those types of issues, but thought that perhaps really the area of focus in the draft ordinance, there were several sections that were highlighted in yellow. And those were areas where I felt like there was feedback in the interim from our last committee meeting to now and changes in ordinances in the other communities that were really more policy decisions. So those included application of the ordinance. So in previous drafts of our ordinance and in many of the ordinances in other communities, the ordinance applies to employers with 4 or more employees or rental dwellings with 4 or more rental units. That mirrors the state statute. I think we've talked about that in the past, but there has been a proposal or a conversation around reducing that number to 1 or more in both instances. So I don't know, probably the best way is maybe let's outline those, let's take those policy issues, let's see, I'm going to highlight them, and then if we come back and have some discussion, then staff would be looking for any additional council direction and additional changes that you might want to see in the ordinance. So that's kind of policy issue number 1. Policy issue number 2 was a recommendation to increase the amount of the civil penalty, which was included in section 615.040I from $500 to $1,000. And then 3 would be providing some clarity around the types of complaints investigated by the city. As we talked about in our last meeting, the ordinance, as it's currently written, does provide, I think, some flexibility, but we've had some conversation about an interest in the city, really on both sides of this, investigating only those complaints related to sexual orientation and gender identity, and directing anyone with complaints on any of the other protected classes to the other resources, whether that be the EEOC or the Kansas Human Rights Commission, who are already equipped and familiar with dealing with those types of issues. So those are, from the staff's perspective, the 3 outstanding policy issues. And with that, unless you have any questions for me at this time, I'd be happy to sit down.
I know, I'm sure we have some people from the public that would like to get up and speak. Like previously, I would just ask that everybody be just respectful of time. We're already running a little bit late, so you keep comments to around 5 minutes or so.
And we did not have a sign-in sheet up earlier. That was our mistake. There's now a sign-in sheet if you'll just include your name and the city that you reside in.
My name is Frank Bruce, 5706 Lamar, Mission, Kansas.
What was that name again?
Frank.
Frank, okay.
Always try to be frank above all else. I want to start out with a question. Over the past year, how many discrimination complaints has the city received?
There's nothing on the books, so there's no process for receiving a complaint. There is no current ordinance or law.
But people complain about everything, I think. Over the past 5 years, have you had any complaints? Over the past 10 years? If you bear with me for just a minute, I'm going to tell you a story about China. And you probably don't think it has any relationship to this, but it really does. Years ago, China had a problem with birds eating too much of their grain. So they had a purge, and they got rid of the birds, as many as they could. You know what happens? The bugs ate more grain than the birds. So trying to correct one problem many times will correct a worse problem. So anyway, think it through very clearly. That's all I have. Thank you.
Are you just doing it for the public right now?
Yeah. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to get up and speak about this issue? Okay. Looks like that's it. So I open it up to any comments from the council.
I've got a question on that. The change, number 1,
yes,
that you were talking about. What's the purpose of that? I mean, why would we want to buck what the state statute is?
Or can I speak to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was the one that proposed moving it down to 1. So there were 2 reasons for that. The first was myself and I believe Laura too looked to see if we could find any explanation as to why it was ever 4 in the state statute, and there was none as to why it was 4. And then second, last meeting, which I think you unfortunately missed, right. There was a lot of comments from council that we wouldn't want to tolerate any discrimination in our city, and so it seemed wrong to me to create an arbitrary 4-number threshold given the sentiments of the council around no discrimination was acceptable.
Well, I think from doing a little research on it, at least with the dwelling units issue, I don't know about the employer's part of it, but I think that also gets back to being able to homestead a property if it has 4 units.
We've excluded family members already.
If I own a 4-plex and I live in one of those units, right, I can still homestead that property. It's my primary residence. And I'm guessing that, I wasn't there when they wrote the original state statutes. I'm guessing from the research I can find, it seems to be related to that.
Okay.
As for the employees thing, I'm not quite sure. Personally, I would have a concern with setting any different precedent than what's already at the state level for the protected classes that exist today. It seems like that process has been in place for a while, and I don't know of any efforts to change that. So to choose one protected class to have a different set of standards than different protected classes, I don't quite know.
It's a uniform statute, so it would apply to everyone, as drafted anyway. So it wouldn't create different standards.
So I guess like
I think that depends. I mean, I think that
just in this city would it be?
Well, I think that depends on the direction you take about what types of complaints that the city investigates, right? So if you're only going to investigate gender identity and sexual orientation,
And it depends on the interpretation of that piece as well, in terms of will we only investigate things that aren't covered by state or federal law, which would also include race-based claims for under 4 units, potentially. If we drafted things that way, you could still do it that way and say that over 4, anything that's covered by other statute wouldn't be addressed by the city.
So that's the question. So if you're going to, are you going to then create and take on from 1 to 3 any of those other currently protected classes?
And that is how Prairie Village has drafted it, just as a reference, another reference point.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just as another reference point to the state. Yeah.
Are we just, you're just doing questions around the changes, is that correct right now?
Yes, yes.
I did see, I know Mayor Kelly from Roeland Park is here, and I know you guys have had an ordinance on the books for a while. Can you speak to what your ordinance says about that and why you went that way, or? Sorry to put you on the spot. If you're not prepared to.
It's no problem. I can tell you I'm not going to be much help on that. I know that we haven't had any complaints related to the ordinance. We've had success from or positive comments from our business community about the ordinance, and from individuals letting them know, letting counselors and myself know that they appreciated being recognized and feeling more a part of the Roeland Park community. But as to the specifics of the ordinance, I'm not prepared to talk on that this evening, so I apologize. But invite me back in the future.
Sure, yeah, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
appreciate it. Looks like we do. If you could come up to the podium, just state your name and city for the record.
Megan England, 5522 Cedar, Roeland Park, Kansas. I was actually one of the co-sponsors of the Roeland Park Ordinance. And we, at that time, just wanted to make it as basic as we could and fashion it as close to the Kansas Act Against Discrimination as possible. But that was 4 years ago, almost 5. And so I think that we've come a long way. And I really applaud the efforts of some of the cities to take a stronger stand and reduce the number. So I feel like if we could rewrite it today, that I would also try to support that minimal number.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the council have any comments about that, or questions, or?
I think it makes sense to have it be at 1 if our goal is to eliminate discrimination. It logically makes sense to have it be as small of a number as possible, right? But I can also understand not wanting to veer away from
I can,
the standard.
I think there's some things about the ordinance that are good. There's some concerns I have, but just for me personally, again, changing it to be more restrictive than what the state already has for discrimination policies is kind of concerning, especially because I'm holding out hope that the state will maybe do the right thing someday and give us some definition around this, maybe take it on themselves, because it really is a state level issue. And it's a little bit tough, I think, if that happens. If we've got more restrictive rules, then we're still going to have to be responsible for fielding and dealing with those cases. So,
would it be possible, sorry.
I'd just say I'd have a hard time supporting it if it changed from where those state level limits were already. It's just me.
Would it be, and this is probably a question for you, Sally, would it be possible to have it for the enforcements we're going to be doing, which is gender identity and sexual orientation, if it moves forward as outlined here?
It wouldn't just be that, though.
As far as what we enforce?
That's a question up for debate.
Okay, so if we get there and say that's what we are going to be doing, would it be possible to say that that is, 1, whereas the other we would stay consistent with the state? See what I'm saying? I know that would create a lot more language in general text, but
I think it just depends on if people care about the uniformity internally within our own policy. So Prairie Village did, or my understanding is their most recent revisions were to change it to only a gender identity and sexual orientation ordinance. They just axed the rest out of it. And so I think that's, our question that hadn't been proposed here, but if we're gonna have a uniform ordinance, it seems weird to me to put it in differently for different classes.
Would you prefer that it be as left as, I know you don't want 4, you want 1, but to ax all the others and to just deal with gender identity and sexual orientation?
I mean, I think it makes sense to have, I still think it makes sense to have a uniform ordinance. I think it makes sense to do it as we had, I believe it was as we had drafted it, or as we had talked about it last time, which is that, parties would be encouraged and informed about their other options. But, getting a lawyer for an EEOC complaint is a lot bigger ask of someone who really might just want to have the conciliation process with their employer that's outlined in the city policy. So I think there are reasons to have the uniform ordinance for all of the classes in the city.
Would you accept a 4 instead of 1?
Would I accept the 4? I mean,
It was your ordinance that you proposed to begin with.
yeah, and that was what I modeled it, and when I did more digging, perhaps this homesteader thing, but I couldn't find anything that specifically explained it, and it was also in light of the conversations that we had as a council, Councilmember Crane's comments last time that she wants to know if anyone is discriminating, so I think making an arbitrary number of 4 doesn't make a lot of sense to me, whether, if it comes down to that, am I willing to tank the whole ordinance over it, that's a different question, but.
Why would we put any number in there?
Right, well, so 1 would be just a person, because
The
there has to be
state
a
of
person.
Kansas has defined it that way, so if we're going to fall in line with the protected class discrimination rules that are already in place in the state of Kansas for other protected classes, the way it was originally proposed would have mirrored that. This would mean that we're going above and beyond the classifications the state of Kansas has in place.
Yeah, I think.
I struggle with that a little bit personally.
Yeah, my concern is more the logistics of dealing with the difference between the state and our own.
Well, we wouldn't deal with the state because we don't deal with enforcing state laws or federal laws. We only deal with
Well, that's
enforcing
what I
our city
mean, but we'd
ordinances.
have to deal with it if it was units under 4 that would fall in those classes. So that's why I'm thinking that we should go back to leave the 4 and as it is, rather than to reduce it to 1.
Or just write the ordinance for.
Or just write the ordinance for those 2 conditions. But I think your intent is to have it be overall.
Unified. I think a uniform ordinance makes sense. I guess I do have a procedure question for Laura too, is if the goal is to just have discussion over these things tonight, and it would be proposed as is at next meeting with the opportunity for amendments, which is how Prairie Village handled it, on each of these points after we've discussed. Is that how we'd go forward?
Procedurally, we've tended, if we can wordsmith and have some consensus on the changes, we would revise the ordinance there, and then any further revisions would be handled via amendment at the city council meeting.
My feeling is that I'm okay with the ordinance as it's been revised, but with regard to the 4, I think that that's the one that I'm having difficulty with, just because it's different than what the state implements.
So I think you said, I think your issue is you would prefer to, if I understood you earlier, prefer to leave it at 4 as opposed to make the change to 1?
That's correct.
The way it's written now.
That is correct.
Which is at 4.
Which is 4.
Yes.
This is a proposed change. These 3 items are proposed changes to the way it was written.
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, I would prefer to go 4 as well.
I mean, you could make an amendment at the council meeting, I guess, if you desire.
Yeah. Do we need to,
So 4, 4,
count it?
4, 4, 4. Okay, so we're at 4. We'll leave it at 4, and if we can certainly make a motion to amend at the meeting. Okay, so that gets us to the change, the increase in the amount of the civil penalty from $500 to $1,000.
I'm just wondering where'd that come from? Just out of curiosity, what brought that one up?
That was again based on comments of wanting to treat discrimination seriously. I think $1,000 has a little more right to it, given the comments from the council last time.
Was it to determine whether 1,000 was the max fine that could be levied by a municipality?
I think it was the minimum fine, right?
Well, it was a max fine. That's
Probably.
the version I heard.
Or damages was my understanding, the way that it was written in our packet.
We have some ordinances that go higher, but it may depend on how you classify it. So 1,000 is pretty common on a lot of our, I think that's our backup in our city code where no other fine is stated.
Okay, so that's already sort of the default for most provisions of our city code is the 1,000.
Are we okay going to 1,000?
Yes.
Okay. So then the last outstanding issue would be what types of complaints, is the city going to investigate all types of complaints, or are we going to narrow our focus to only those related to sexual orientation and gender identity?
I would prefer that since the state already has a process and a Human Rights Coalition that works on cases of non-sexual identity or gender discrimination, that we continue to utilize that process that's already been in place, is still in place, and only handle the ones that the state wouldn't cover in this case.
Yes, that's how I agree.
I mean, I would just repeat what I said before, which is that there are huge barriers to bringing that sort of litigation for an individual plaintiff, and I think that there might just be a lot of people, you know, who haven't utilized that process because it's difficult and expensive and time-consuming, who really would just like a facilitated sit-down with their employer. And if we had it as a uniform ordinance, we would enable that as a city.
I think if we're going to stick with a uniform ordinance, it makes sense to have uniform enforcement across the board.
But the city can't weigh in on any of the Title VII activities.
No, so someone would elect if they want to just have a city complaint, or we would advise them of their other options that would have, you know, greater damages possibilities, etc., under the classes that are protected under state and federal law.
I didn't count, I'm sorry.
Anyone
On
else
that
agree
one.
with
So, let me understand this. Is it that we will direct them, or that we will adjudicate?
Both here, sir.
You can't adjudicate based on religion, Carl. You can't do
Well,
that.
Yes, we could. We could, if we pass this ordinance, we could absolutely.
That's the question.
Yes, we could. Is that where you want the
And the state could
focus?
also.
And the state could also.
At the state effective one.
Yeah,
I've
just
never
like
seen
how
a
there's-
case that we've ever adjudicated
So,
on any of those.
so Debbie,
we
just
don't
like
have
how
a
there are
ordinance for
state
that.
and federal statutes that cover the same things, we have a city statute that would cover, in part, the same thing. And so people could choose if they just wanted the easier city process to do that. They could elect to do that, or they could elect to pursue a federal court action where there are a greater range of remedies, etc. So we'd be leaving it up to the person bringing the complaint. But we'd be advising them of all of their rights and saying, you know, these are the groups with expertise.
So if we only had the other two elements and did not define the other Title VII issues.
There's 10 protected classes.
Right.
Now, we're considering 2.
Right, why would we not just put the 2?
Well, the idea would be to have a uniform ordinance, that we have a city position on discrimination with a uniform policy, which is how Roeland Park did it, I believe.
How does Bird Village do it?
Bird Village, it's gone the other way.
They just listed the 2.
Their original proposal had all, and then they
Was there any rationale behind it on theirs, on
It-
their part?
I think from what I saw, some of the rationale was that the state process is already in place to handle the other types of complaints. And even though it might be somewhat slightly more burdensome to go through that process, there is a process that's been in place that seems to serve.
And I don't really think they had a discussion of some of those burdens and difficulties in bringing state or federal litigation as a single plaintiff either. But
I like the idea of it being more accessible to residents by having a uniform. I think that makes sense. Allowing residents that maybe couldn't afford the legal fees that would be associated with going through the state, being able to come to the city and at least get some guidance as far as where to move from.
So if Roeland Park went uniform, have they had anyone take them up on the other?
My understanding that Roeland Park has not had a complaint filed since they passed their ordinance in 2014 on any issue, unless something's happened in the last 3 months.
Last few.
Right.
Not that I know of.
So, and so I mean, I think many cities had non-discrimination ordinances in place which did not include sexual orientation and gender identity. So many cities have had a similar ordinance. We've had nothing. So there has been no opportunity for someone to come forward. So, you know, I think the message that staff heard was we want to at least be inclusive in the language of the ordinance to make sure that we are communicating in this manner that we don't tolerate at any level, right? And so then it just becomes, what will it be our responsibility to actually move through the investigative process for versus someone could bring us a complaint and then we become more of that conduit of it, we intake and direct to you know, another agency who might already be established and equipped to handle those kinds of things.
Okay.
Is that?
Gotcha.
Well, but wouldn't the choice on how to proceed with that be up to the person bringing the complaint forward?
Well, I think we have to, that's the question. Right. So how direct are we going to be in our ordinance? I think it would be certainly our intent from our perspective as we drafted it that we don't have that. This ordinance, I think, could open the door for people who had an issue on any of the other currently protected classes to come forward and express that and feel like they had some place to take that, and then we would know how best to handle that. So, but we're really down to that fundamental question of, are we going to invest, is it their choice or our choice in terms of what we investigate?
And so how much city staff would take, how much resources would it take for the staff to go ahead and take that over that normally?
Depends on how big of a problem.
We have to get our city attorney involved.
That's my question on the next round of this information. Is the hearing officer and the investigative, are those paid positions? Are those volunteers? I mean, there's a level of expertise in understanding EEOC and the law that it actually protects. It's not like you can just flip it overnight.
But it's not EEOC, they're only applying our ordinance.
Well, EEOC covers the sexual, religion, all the rest of them.
Right, but that's not what our city.
I mean, I think it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult, and you know, as we've talked about, most of the cities who have non-discrimination ordinances have such a low volume of complaints that it's difficult to. I mean, if we could put together some estimates, but it wouldn't. I'm not sure they would, you know, mean anything at this point. So,
yeah.
I think on the basis of what we've heard from other cities, we leave it the way it's been proposed.
Which is that we would let the people choose, but that we would direct them about their other options. Correct. That would be my preference.
I don't know how the city can speak to some of those because we don't have the expertise to tell people, this is what you should do, this is what you, that's what attorneys usually do.
Right, so when you look at, and we have it specified, Privilege went as far as to specify who the investigator and the hearing officer would be, and I believe they designated, I don't know if it's final in their ordinance yet, but they designated their city prosecutor as the investigator and the municipal judge as the hearing officer.
Okay.
We did not go that far, so if you look at who those are, it's a selection of the mayor with confirmation by the council, so certainly we would go out and look at who would be qualified to handle those.
Like not the
complaints.
Adjunct, more the staff.
No.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mary Gerlt. I'm actually from Wyandotte County, but I just had a brief opinion comment I wanted to interject. Personally, I'm very interested in protecting minorities, and for me, the very smallest minority is the individual. And I feel like having ordinances and laws like this, telling people who they can rent to, who they can hire, who they can interact with, and you know, how we decide those rules, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's kind of distasteful to me. So, and also just the arbitrary, you know, deciding where the fines are, how to punish people for making personal choices, however we dislike those choices. I don't think it's the right way to go. I think there are better ways to deal with discrimination in the private sector, through boycotting, through letter writing campaigns, through letters to the editor, bring those people out to the light. I think having ordinances and things like that can lead to witch hunts and things like that, false accusations. I just find it a little bit kind of a slippery slope, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
So on this particular point, do we want to say if we're going to have it be uniform, or if we want to carve out?
I'd say leave it uniform.
Leave it uniform? Do we want to go down the row? I guess again, Pat?
That's fine.
I'd like to see it separate.
Separate.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see it separate also.
Uniform. So it's tied up, so we can either hold it for...
In this case, what I'm going to do is, we have a draft ordinance. I mean, I think I would leave it in this case, so somebody
This would make a change to that.
Yes.
And there was no
There's no
consensus to make a
consensus,
change.
so we'll take this forward the way it's worded.
Okay.
Okay? So this will be on your city council agenda with the only change, so I'll put the red line version in, but I'm going to put a clean version of the ordinance because red line gives me a headache sometimes to read. So we'll put a clean version, and the only change that we will make is the 500 to 1,000, and then, right? Okay. Turn the page. Turn the page. I think it's me. Is that right?
Consent agenda, right?
Consent agenda?
Yeah.
I do.
Is that, oh,
No.
Wake up.
we got wasted.
Very
All right, next up, we have a resolution to call a public hearing on establishing CID for the Roeland Townhomes Association. So Laura, if you could-
Yes, thank you. So we have been working for over a year on how do we successfully resolve the subsidence that occurred to the private parking area and behind the Roeland Townhomes. We talked briefly, it was a discussion item last month about our success in working with the HOA and exploring some, I think, have been some creative solutions in terms of the creation of a community improvement district, which would give us the ability to exercise a special assessment component and allow the costs for the improvements to private property to be spread equally amongst those 20 units at Roeland Townhomes over a 22-year period. So the Homes Association and the property owners have submitted a valid petition that was included in your city council packet that included signatures from 17 of the 20 property owners. And so the first step in the consideration or continued discussion of creation of a community improvement district is for the city council to pass a resolution to call a public hearing. And so that is the specific action item that is on your agenda this evening and would be on the agenda next week at the council meeting. The resolution is also included. It just sets the date and time of the hearing. We would conduct the hearing and then the council can take action on the actual creation of the community improvement district following the conclusion of that public hearing.
I recommend that we move that forward. Can that be on a consent? Just because it is a public hearing?
This is just a resolution. I would probably recommend that we not. It could, I think, technically, but I would recommend that we not. It gives us another opportunity on a public record to state the date and time of the public hearing. And then we would have our public hearing at the January, I think it's January 16th, city council meeting.
Good job, by the way, of getting creative on that.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thanks
to the HOA and then the residents. There's a lot of time and effort and hours that have been put in by many. So we'll look forward to moving this down the road.
Next up is number 4 on our agenda tonight, an update on the Kansas Eastern Regional Insurance Trust for 2019. Brian, if you could have a question on that.
Okay, now for the really exciting stuff.
I can't believe everyone didn't stick around.
Yeah, really.
Why did everyone leave?
This used to be the Brian Scott show. This is where I got pushed to the side. Okay. Okay,
About our upcoming 2019 IT support services contract.
No, I do.
Well, we do too.
Sorry, I got that blank cake.
so I'm just kind of move along through this. The City of Mission does belong to the Kansas Eastern Regional Insurance Trust, more affectionately known as KERIT. This is a workers' compensation pool that was created in 2000, actually before 2009. We've belonged to it since 2009. There are 18 other member cities, mostly in Johnson County, as well as a little further out, as far as Chanute, and close to Wichita area. We submitted this year our payroll. They ran that through the calculations, comparing it against our loss experience mod, as well as some other calculations to come up with a premium that is due for 2019, and that is a total of $92,339. That is increased by 4% from last year. And what you'll see in your packet are 2016, 2017, 2018. You'll see underneath 2016, 2017 audited. So shortly after the new year, a representative from KERIT will come out. They'll actually look at our payroll, our actual payroll for the year. And then, since most likely our payroll will be less, we'll wind up getting a reduction of premium. And that will show up in the second installment, usually paid around June, July. So the final bill will probably not be $92,000, it'll probably be considerably less than that.
So sick leave, vacation leave, and a portion of overtime is excluded. So when we submit payroll, we assume regular hours for the entire year.
It's a full payroll.
And so those things we know it will always come down every year because we have those categories which will be excluded by the auditors.
Did it include open but unfilled positions or? No?
Yes.
Also
yes.
that? Okay.
Yeah, it's budgeted.
So I would move this forward. I think this could be a consent.
I agree with that.
Well, I suppose. That's fine. I agree with that. Next up, we have an update on our personnel policy and guidelines.
Yes, and there's a red line version of the personnel manual in your packet. Again, in anticipation of the NDO, in the action item, I tried to summarize those sections of our personnel manual where we inserted gender identity as a class that was protected. Our personnel manual for, I think we've looked back, and as long as I can find, has included sexual orientation. So we did need to update to include gender identity, and you'll see that those items are the ones that are bulleted in the action item summary on the pages where we made that change and that insertion. The remaining changes were really minimal this year. We do an internal review, and then we also send our manual out for an external HR and legal review, just to make sure that we're keeping current with any changes that may have happened in the law over the last year. And so just very quickly, kind of the highlights. We corrected some typos. Probably the first most significant change would be E18 on page 24, adding language to address requirements for employees working at home. We obviously have obligations to pay employees from working at home as technology advances, and that becomes more and more prevalent. It's important for us to be clear about those requirements in our personnel manual. F16 on page 30, we added some language that just very specifically states that your behavior while you are on travel and training approved by the city should be professional and reflect positively on the city. We've not, I don't believe, had an issue with that, but sometimes you're better off just to, make sure we're very clear about what our expectations are. As technology and the use of cell phones in the workplace continues to increase, we added some language. We kind of beefed up F20 on page 32 over the last several years, but we made it very clear that don't take recreational photos of coworkers without their permission, and outlines and then outlines the parameters for the use of personal cell phones during work hours, so that if it becomes a problem, we can very clearly point to the personnel manual that says this is an area that we can address.
Do employees get like an update, like a summary with all the changes, or they just send a new manual? Or
So they'll get a link, and then they will sign, they actually sign an acknowledgement that they've received it.
Okay.
Okay? G3, number 6 on page 33, we just clarified that improper conduct could include repeated, not just falsification, but repeated falsification of personnel records, timesheets, or city records. I1 on page 37 requires an employee to work the entire notice period when terminating employment. So if you give us your 2 weeks notice and you have 2 weeks of vacation, you have to work. You have to work.
Paid out.
Right. J5 just again clarifies that this is part of our standard practice, but again providing some clarity that disciplinary action could include required retraining or mandatory referral to the employee assessment program as a potential disciplinary action. N9, page 59, we did remove a bullet point related to the prohibition of carrying weapon while on city premises, including a city vehicle. If you have a valid concealed carry permit, we're not able to restrict that behavior of our employees. So that bullet came out of the personnel manual this year.
Is that only for people with a permit? You know? If not, that's okay. I thought it was everyone, but.
It's the KSA statute.
Kansas requires it.
Right.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be just concealed, it should be.
I'll send the language that we had from the attorney that reviewed it, but his recommendation was that needed to come out, that we couldn't generally restrict an employee from carrying. So I'll certainly distribute that. And then we had included in the past, and I just don't think it's possible for us to do anymore, to prohibit the use of our name or logo. So we cleaned that language up. So
Can you explain that to me, please? So an employee use our name and logo for their own purposes?
I think that I'll go find the other email that I have on that one. I didn't get that one printed off, that just kind of talks specifically about what they felt was our inability to really enforce that provision in the personnel manual. So any other changes, areas of discussion, anything else that you saw in the personnel manual? Yes?
I had a couple of things. On page 36 under M, improper conduct, behavior, blah, blah, blah. Sorry to say blah, blah, blah. I could keep reading, but you don't want to hear me. Just look under M on page 36 of the handbook. I noticed gender identity was missing.
Okay.
But sexual orientation is there.
I missed a spot, so there you go.
I actually read the whole thing. And so my other two suggestions, recommendations, and I'm a little biased considering I'm pregnant, but under E13 on page 22 regarding non-FMLA maternity leave, I'd like to recommend that the city considers providing more specific language, because right now the language in the handbook says the city will provide a leave of absence for a reasonable period of time following childbirth. And I feel like that's really kind of left up to the discretion of the city. And while I know oftentimes non-FMLA employees are part-time, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just haven't been working there for 12 months yet. So I'd like to see at least 8 weeks, at least 12. I'd like to see a little bit of language, just so I'd hate to have any employee feel scared when they find out they're pregnant and they haven't been here for 12 months. I'd hate to have any woman feel that way as they're considering their options.
So tell me again, which page? Page
22 in the handbook, under A, E13A.
I agree that setting a minimum would make sense, that you could still have it be longer.
You could negotiate with the city for a reasonable period of time, but I think having a minimum just to give some reassurances, whether it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I ask that the staff considers that. And something else, of course, related to maternity, page 60 of the handbook, under N11, is break time for nursing. Unpaid breaks each workday for up to 1 year after the birth of her child. I would recommend that unpaid breaks unlimited as a woman continues nursing her child if she needs to sew pump during that time period. I don't think that we need to set a limit on how long a woman can breastfeed their child, because they're not able to go take a break, especially if it's unpaid. So that's my only other suggestion. And of course, it's related to pregnancy-related items.
Let me ask a question. Many of these items are more procedural in nature that can gather throughout the year. You want to adjust the handbook to reflect that. Is this the appropriate place to bring up policy decisions?
Yes,
Okay.
it has been.
Okay.
It can be. And the personnel manual can be revised at any point
Okay.
throughout the course of the year.
I would also, can I go back to Hillary's E13? And this might be a discussion for another time, but I also think that we should make it, page 22, that we should consider a gender-neutral policy on that we should provide for parental leave, unpaid parental leave.
So what I might suggest here is that because as I listen to some of the other things in talking about specifying a minimum period of time, my guess is that knowing the information needs of this group, as I think we do, that you'll want to see what others may have, or what, kind of what some standards are, what options you might have out there. And then as well, what does an unpaid, or what does paid parental leave, what do those policies look like? How are they drafted? How are they crafted? So we can certainly put together a package around those issues if I'm understanding that correctly, and bring that back and then kind of look at those rather than trying to piecemeal those, because I think they're all related.
And match the FMLA.
Yeah, that's a federal law that's been around for a while.
The only real difference is one's paid, one isn't, right? One's paid leave, one the unpaid leave.
Well, this is all unpaid as
Yes,
here.
that Family Medical Leave Act is unpaid.
Sorry, yeah.
Can be unpaid.
But it can be paid.
It can be paid if you have the or if you have the accrued leave time. I mean, the way it is right now, we require the use of those policies. So I think
Isn't that considered like sick time pay as opposed to FMLA?
it runs concurrent with, according to the way our policy is written at this time. So I think the bigger question in terms of the parental leave or paid is who pays it. So is it a requirement for the employee to use, sick leave, or is the city going to say we will provide paid leave, parental leave? I mean, is that what you're? I mean, is that the?
Yeah, I'm saying that. I mean, my point wasn't even about paid leave, but I think that's a good discussion to have too. But my point, but my point was about making it gender neutral. This is currently a maternity leave policy, and I think we should be looking at family leave.
Okay. And then I would also roll that break time for nursing women into that. That's the same kind of category of considerations. Okay. Anything else that you would like to see incorporated? So my sorry, RC.
No, you're fine. So mine's not related, but F16, page 30, where you guys have the ads language that requires behavior well on city group. I just want to make sure that doesn't, and that's a pretty broad statement, but I just want to make sure that doesn't mean that when you're out traveling or whatever, you can't just go and have a few drinks after your events or things like that. Does that?
It absolutely doesn't prohibit. I mean, it doesn't prohibit that. I think it talks about number one, the personnel policies and guidelines do not apply to the city council.
Well,
no, I think it's a legitimate point, and I think if the issue is clarity, right. So I think that I think for employees, there still are applications about the consumption of alcohol while on work time. So I think this is really just intended to say you are still representing, even though you are in a different city or in the same city on a travel and training opportunity, you're still representing our city and our organization.
We make the original question to Sully, when this is presented to the employee, it's presented online, they can sign off on it as a link. Are the changes actually identified for them, indicating what things have changed this?
What I'll do is send out an email to all the employees. Yeah. I'll go through and
identify
I'll say,
key elements.
Yeah, go find the policy on the city's website under the employees section, read through that. Here's a highlight of some of the key changes. And by the way, I need to have that form signed back in my office by the end of the week.
So,
just full disclosure, I wanted to let you know that when we go to Vegas, the chief does wear a polo shirt with LAPD on it, so that people don't think it's from Michigan.
What I would recommend, if the council is amenable, is that we take this manual as drafted forward for approval next week, and that we come back with those additional changes, and then we revise those at that time, so we don't hold up the whole manual for that purpose.
Okay. And those could be done before next year, potentially, right? Those additional changes, or would it hold until the entire next year?
They could be implemented, you can have an effective date, yes, right. So if they come back in January or February, they can have an effective date at whatever time. You would have to republish the ordinance.
Okay.
But you're basically a week, 2 weeks from adoption to effective date.
So does this go on consent agenda?
Please.
Will you make it?
Sure.
Think so? All right. Next up, we have
Brian Scott.
item number 6. We have Brian to update us on property casualty and general liability insurance renewals.
This is a little bit important. So we have health insurance, dental vision, we have workers' compensation insurance, and we also have property and liability insurance. We utilize the services of CBIZ to help us in brokering and obtaining insurance provider. We've been, for the last few years, with a firm called One Beacon, and we've had really good results with them. When I sat down with a broker back in the fall, they said that One Beacon's gotten a little bit hard in the pricing, so they suggested we go out to the market to see if we could get other bids at a more reasonable price. So we did that. We got 3 bids back, One Beacon, Travelers, and Apex Brit, which is a firm that I do not have much experience with. The proposal from Apex Brit was not really competitive. Deductibles were much higher than those that were offered by One Beacon and Travelers, and the cost was not really in line with the other 2. So we really focused our attention on One Beacon and Travelers. One Beacon did offer a renewal proposal of $121,483 for next year. Travelers offered a proposal of $118,226. And the interesting thing about this is that both firms offered the opportunity to buy additional umbrella coverage, or excess liability is another term for that. We've been buying excess liability for $1 million for the past few years. But with the opportunity, especially with One Beacon, to buy additional excess liability of up to $3 million for really pennies on the dollar was too good of an opportunity to pass up. And Laura kind of asked, well, why do we need excess liability policy in the Kansas torts? And the reason for that is because twofold. One, municipalities are seeing more and more exposure in the federal courts. It just takes somebody to say I've been discriminated against for whatever reason, it goes to the federal courts, and the Kansas tort liability is out the window. Secondly, our broker advises everybody close to the state line. There are opportunities where our employees have to cross the state line on business, especially police activity, and if there's any kind of incident that occurs, again, Kansas tort is kind of out the window. So the excess liability does protect us in those incidents. With that said, One Beacon offered a proposal for $3 million in excess liability, total of $126,397, where Travelers only offered $119,868. So it would be our recommendation to actually switch to Travelers for 2019 for a total of $119,868. In addition, we're also recommending continuation of cyber liability insurance for $3,238. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
Great. Do we have any recommendation for consent?
Is that a recommendation from Kristen?
Yeah, there's a recommendation from Kristen. You got it. Kind of quiet over here.
Give her one.
All right, right, next up we have an update again from Brian on the 2019 IT support services contract.
Okay. We've been utilizing Johnson County Department of Information and Technology Innovation for the past several years to provide network support for us. They based their cost on primarily the number of users that we have. And they had told me last year that they've done reanalysis and they're expecting their cost to go up. So I was expecting to see a bill for about $60,000. I was pleasantly surprised to see one for $54,738. Some of the things are provided in this is application support, data management, network support, network security, and then general support center help desk services. And this is for both city and police. Because there are so many users on the police department side, they've broken this down into 2 different bills. So city would include everybody up here at City Hall as well as Public Works Facility and the Community Center. And then police obviously is just police. So as I say, the total for all of those for the year is $54,738.
I would just ask a little bit on just if we've had any concerns on the level of service, or if we've considered any other partners in this area, or is there anything else there? I know in the past we had some issues, if I remember right. Wondering if that's been the status quo still, if it's gotten better, if we've considered other options out there, or?
We did utilize a private firm at one time, and my understanding is the cost was almost double. It was $100,000 plus a year for that service, which is what kind of drove us to go to Johnson County DTI. Their service has been spotty over the years. I think they've gotten better at some of it's just communication. We meet quarterly with them, and we go over service requests that we submitted, and we make sure those are all closed out. If they're not, what's the lingering issue? We try to get that resolved. They've been very good about just kind of showing up when we need them, especially with the technology improvements we're making this summer. I kind of tapped into them when necessary to actually integrate the phone system into our network and to take the video and integrate that into our network. So they've been very good about coming and sitting down with our vendors and talking about the needs and working through those, and they haven't charged us for it, which has been nice. You know, with a private firm, I'd be expecting to see a bill for that. So they are flexible.
During your quarterly reviews, when you go over items that have been closed, is there an SLA or like a runtime that they average for when you guys request service?
Yeah, they'll show the date that the initial call-in was made, and then they'll show a closeout date. Some of those are kind of long. There have been some complications, specifically in the police department, with some of the mobile units that are used in the police cars. I think they finally kind of confessed, about a year ago that this wasn't really their specialty, dealing with those particular mobile units and that software. One of the issues that we're having is that mobile units operate in a software called Centrix, which is an outdated software. And there's not many people on their staff that are really used to working with Centrix. They've talked to the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, who does have some familiarity with Centrix. But really the suggestion that they're making to us is to move to a newer software application for that mobility, Microsoft-based software. And again, it kind of gets back to building out our network, which we've been working on this summer, and then making those software upgrades once that's in place.
So would it be possible, like in parallel to working towards those software updates, to go see what else is out there?
In terms of the service, yeah.
Because I know that's a huge thing.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Some of it's been time, frankly. We've been a little stretched staff-wise to do that. But yeah, we can certainly do that this year.
Good job.
Move it ahead.
Yep. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Don't go too far, Brian.
Next up, oh, yes.
Alcohol tax.
How could I forget?
How are you here? You've been waiting for this.
Yeah. 2019 2019 alcohol tax fund allocations. Okay. So by state statute, the state of Kansas imposes a 10% liquor drink tax, better known as the alcohol tax, on the sale of any drink containing alcoholic liquor sold by clubs, caterers, or drinking establishments. Revenue derived from this tax is allocated 30% to the state, 70% to the city or county where the tax is collected. We collected about $78,000, a little bit less last year total. By state statute, we're required to divvy that up into 3 separate funds. A third of that goes to the general fund, a third of that goes to a special parks and recreation fund, and then a third of that goes to the alcohol fund. And the money that's used in the alcohol fund, we utilize to fund our DARE activities to the Mission Police Department. We've been using that to fund our mental health response program that we established last year. And we also use a portion of that to fund programs for alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and those are in danger of becoming alcoholics or drug abuse. And that is required by state statute. The Johnson County United Community Services has been the one that's kind of coordinated those programs over the last several years. They receive special alcohol funds from municipalities in Johnson County and the county itself. They then take those funds and they apply those to providers that they have evaluated through a grant process. There's a list of those providers in your packet that they're recommending for funding for 2019, as well as a fairly detailed report stipulating exactly the specifics of the requests and the results projected for each of those grants.
Brian, what is Mirror Incorporated?
Yeah, I allow Mara Schott from UCS to answer that question. She's more familiar with these organizations than I am. So, and she is here tonight. And did Leanne come?
She had to get her children to bed.
Okay, yeah, good for her.
My name is Maria Schott. I'm the Director of Resource Allocation at United Community Services, and Leanne Reisinger is the representative from the City of Mission on the Drug and Alcoholism Council. She had planned to be here but couldn't be out that late with her young children. In response to your question, MIR is listed on page 12. They're a statewide organization and they've provided services in Johnson County for about 20 years. The particular program that's being funded through these alcohol tax dollars is a residential treatment program. They also provide outpatient services, but they did not request alcohol tax fund support from this pooled fund for that program. So it's their residential program, and they are particularly working with folks who have dual diagnosis of a mental health issue and substance abuse.
The reason I asked, it's one of the higher thresholds of monies being given, and it's in Newton, Kansas. That's why I asked.
Headquarters are in Newton, right? Yeah. So treatment's more expensive than prevention. I think that's pretty well researched around that. So
there are 34 bed facilities in Shawnee.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. But they serve folks from throughout Johnson County.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about any of the recommendations or the programs that are recommended for funding? Yes.
I really like I just wanted to make a note, number 1, 5% operating or administrative costs is very impressive. Great job on that. And also I really like the results projected. It was nice to kind of just read a snapshot about each grant proposal and see what each organization was asking for. So I just wanted to applaud that write-up. And my final question is, what is the reporting process for the organization?
The grantees report twice a year, one at mid-year about in July for the first 6 months of the year, they're out both on a financial report as well as a program report. So how those funds have been spent, and also how many people they've served by city, as well as what the outcomes, what they've achieved. And then the year-end report, the final report, the other 6 months, and also kind of a year-end capture is due in January. So then once I receive all the reports, I put together a year-end report, which we send to city staff, and I hope that it gets passed on to council folks so you can see what exactly was achieved by those organizations that are funded with your dollars by the end of the year.
Great, thank you.
Do you guys work with anybody that specializes in tobacco education?
Well, I heard all of that discussion about Tobacco 21, and I was reading through the report thinking that might come up. And in fact, Prevention Services, which is a part of Johnson County Mental Health, is working around that issue. They have a campaign called End the Trend. It's a social media campaign that Jamie Katz was here earlier also and was telling me that it's really aimed at middle school students, but it's put together by older students. And that's one of the things they're doing. In Olathe School District, I know they're doing an interesting program around vaping, but it's not a part of the alcohol tax fund. I really wouldn't want to speak to it. First Call is also doing some work around vaping. Yes?
Sorry, I did have one other question. I noticed, and you spoke to in the writing about KBC dropping, they requested $100,000 and you supported $35,000 in funding. And it sounds like they weren't able to provide with things. It sounds like they were kind of short-sighted. Whatever happened in their last grant cycle. It didn't work. I'm trying to say it delicately. But I'm only curious because I'm a foster parent. I'm a certified foster parent. I don't have a foster child now. I'm curious if something was to happen with KBC this coming year, would any of that fund, as far as a state level, would any of that funding come back to you all?
I don't think so. They had a really hard time getting this program started up. They ran into some unexpected barriers. Some of it had to do with the KCPC, which is the Kansas Client Placement Criteria, and folks not wanting to get involved in the program. And they think their numbers are up now, and they have received some other. I was really encouraging them to. The feedback that I received from the Drug and Alcoholism Council was that they really wanted to see other funds invested in this, not just the alcohol tax funds. And I'm told they have received some funding for that. So even at this reduced amount from what they had asked for, they intend to provide the services that they outlined in 2019. And I think they'll probably come back and ask for increased support, is my guess.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Consent.
Great. Thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Next up, we have an update on contract for animal control services. So, Laura, you want to go ahead and go on that?
Thank you. So I think as we're all familiar, we've been working over the course of this last year to look at how we provide animal control services on an ongoing basis. We've been a member of NEAC since 1983, but the NEAC organization has been talking collectively over the last couple of years about new service delivery models and methods. As we went through our budget process this year, the chief made a recommendation which was supported and included in the 2019 budget to look at providing animal control services through the use of community service officers in our police department. So animal control would be a portion of the work that they perform, recognizing that we were the largest financial contributor to the Northeast Animal Control Commission and wanting to try to maintain those cooperative and collaborative relationships that we've had with the other member communities. We looked at our ability then to be able to provide those services contractually. So we went through a process of talking about what services would be expected, developing those contract documents, and on your agenda this evening are four contract documents that have been executed by other cities: Fairway, Roeland Park, Westwood, and Mission Woods. Westwood Hills is the only one that was not included in your packet. I expect that will come forward. We're working with just a couple of little minor language changes with them. But they have been through the other governing bodies and are now ready for our council's acceptance and approval.
I recommend we take it forward. And not on consent.
I have a quick question. Laura, we outline a couple of definitions and services provided. But a term like animal cruelty may mean something different in Westwood to what it means in Mission. Maybe not by much, but do you think it would make sense to possibly include maybe a link to or a reference to what our code is in terms of what we'll be providing in the contract? Because they might have different expectations if their code is different.
Well, and we will follow their code. So we will be enforcing the code in that individual city, so that's why it wasn't specifically referenced.
So even though there are CSOs, are our CSOs provided then with the applicable codes for all different cities?
Yes. So that's one of the things that they will need to learn moving forward. So yes, we will be actually enforcing their existing codes. And I think one of the provisions that you see, I don't remember where exactly in the contract, but it asks that the cities, as they change, if they make changes to their animal control ordinances, that they advise us so that we can certainly keep up with those changes.
All right. Next up, we have an item on 2018 budget amendments.
Yes, so each year when we adopt our annual budget, it establishes the maximum expenditure authority for each fund or taxing authority in that particular fiscal year. So if we exceed those approved expenditure authority without formally amending our budget, it is technically a violation of the Kansas budget statutes, which we don't like to do. So each year, as we get towards the end of the year, we try to look at how are we trending in all of our funds, and do we have a need for a budget amendment. And this year, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. This year we do have a need to amend the budget for the Mission Convention and Visitors Bureau Fund. So the state law also requires that as we amend that budget, we need to call a public hearing similar to the way that we do with the adoption of our annual budget. So that the hearing has been set for your council meeting next week, at which time you would essentially open that public hearing, take any comments, and then close the public hearing, and then you can certainly take action on a revision or the budget amendment. So the budget amendment is not the result of any unauthorized expenditures or really unanticipated, but the Mission Convention and Visitors Bureau Fund is one that is primarily a pass-through fund for activities of the Mission Business Partnership, for our holiday adoption program, and any other sort of special programs or things that we might be doing over the course of the year. And so it's very difficult at the time we put the annual budget together to really know what those activities might be over the course of a year. So the only known revenue that we have coming into the Mission Convention and Visitors Bureau Fund in any particular year is our transient guest tax revenues, and those are dedicated exclusively to the production and distribution of the Mission magazine. So this year, as we looked at that, the request, we did see a need to request an increase in the expenditure authority to account for really primarily holiday adoptions, and we don't know what that final amount will be, but we don't spend more money than we take in as it relates to the holiday adoption programs over the course of any particular year. We also, the chief had several fundraising efforts, you may recall, for Alexander Godwin. So we raised about $8,000 this year in support of Alex. That was certainly not an anticipated revenue or expense, but again, we only spend what we bring in. And then we've had some other charitable giving activities over the course of the year. The Mission Business Partnership and their expenses related to the Sunflower Festival totaled about $8,000. And so those are really what are driving the request to increase the expenditure authority for this fund. So we're asking for an increase in that authority from $60,000 to $90,000 for 2018.
So because it's a hearing, you need to put it on the non-concerns, is that correct?
Yes, well, it'll show up as a public hearing on your budget, and then there would be an action item. You'll have a resolution that would appear later on your agenda as an action item.
Well, I think it's worth just talking about the good that the city has done here. I mean, it's a weird ordinance maybe that we have to deal with, or a thing that we have to deal with, but we're having to deal with it because people have stepped up and donated a lot of money.
I think it's awesome.
Yes.
Trying to make a difference. That's good.
Okay.
So we're going to take that one forward.
Take it forward, and that goes on non-consensus.
All right, number 11 on our agenda tonight, we've got 2019 budget ordinance.
And this is really just a housekeeping item each year. As a part of our annual budget process, this is kind of one of the last steps. We take formal action to adopt the 2019 budget by ordinance. So we pass a budget ordinance in the summer when we adopt it that outlines the underlying fiscal policies that are included in that budget, but then you just by motion adopt the budget. So this formalizes the budget by ordinance, finalizes that budget, and provides the expenditure authority over the course of the year. And we have no changes to the budget as approved by the council in August of this year. Consent? Yep.
All right, number 12 is an update, or the renewal of the ordinance directing the city administrator to spend according to budget.
Yes, again, housekeeping item. This is something we look at each year. This just authorizes the city administrator to make expenditures in accordance with the adopted 2019 annual budget in accordance with other council policies and or ordinances that we have regulating spending limits.
And the final action item that we have on this agenda tonight is an update to the cereal malt beverage license renewals.
Yes. Every year, those businesses that currently have a cereal malt beverage license do need to renew. We have, I don't have it in front of me, I believe we have 5. We have Hy-Vee grocery store, Hy-Vee convenience store, Target, Quick Trip, and Johnny's. And they've all submitted their applications, and they go through background checks through the police department, so they are ready to go.
Yeah, they said
I'm sorry?
actual beer.
Yeah. They're not a CMB. They'll get a license through the state, and then we'll mirror that license at the city level.
Finally, on our agenda tonight, we have a discussion item on the 2019 legislative priorities.
And I might just ask the discretion of both chairs. So we do have an item, I think it's item 3 on our Community Development Committee, which is the de-annexation request from the City of Roeland Park. And I know that Mayor Kelly and their City Administrator Keith Moody are here. And it might be nice to move, if the council didn't mind, if we move them forward, and then the remaining items that we have, we can certainly just move through at our own pace.
Please.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay? Okay, thank you. So we'll.
Do we have to formally adjourn this meeting and then open the other one and come back, or is there a process?
I think maybe if you would just say we'd like to revise the Finance and Administration Committee agenda and move the de-annexation item and consider it under other business, that would be appropriate.
Okay, well, I would like to take the discussion item on the annexation request from the Community Development Committee and move it under other business in our Finance Administration.
Second.
Agreement? Okay.
Great.
Then with that, I would invite, I don't know which, Mayor Kelly? All right, thank you.
Thank you all for your consideration, and thanks for inviting us to be here this evening. I understand you've had a long night filled with a lot of interesting topics, so I promise to be brief. I am Mike Kelly, Mayor of the City of Roeland Park. With me here today is our Administrator, Keith Moody. We're here before you tonight in furtherance of our shared goal of transforming the easternmost portion of Johnson Drive, specifically the land located at the northeast corner of Johnson Drive and Roe. Mission and Roeland Park have both been working diligently over multiple years to make this corridor a better reflection of our communities. As you know, in recent years we've opened the Commerce Bank and the St. Luke's Hospital on the northwest corner of that property. Additionally, we've received a Planning Sustainable Places grant through the Mid-America Regional Council to, in part, make the area of Johnson Drive more vibrant, to better serve our pedestrians through connectivity, in a place that really helps support our shared goals of healthy communities and a healthy natural environment. We welcome Mission's participation in this visioning process for that Planning Sustainable Places grant. Like you, we are very excited for the gateway to come to fruition and bring excitement and energy to our shared community. As stated in our letter in the packet, the parcel of ground on that northeast corner of the intersection is wholly owned by the city of Roeland Park, yet a 0.7 acre sliver remains within the city limits boundary of the city of Mission. By allowing us to partner in this de-annexation process, we can simplify zoning, plan submittals, reviews, and the approval process for development of that property, allowing continued momentum and energy within this area. Throughout this process, no addresses will change. There are no land sales considered. This is really just an opportunity using a common process recognized under Kansas law to mutually recognize the benefits of developing an underutilized portion of our community. Growth begets growth. We believe the circumstances presented will recognize the best financial opportunity for both communities and look forward to working with you to continue the vitalization and beautification of the Johnson Drive corridor. I'd like to welcome Keith Moody to provide a few remarks, and then we're both here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council and Mayor. I appreciate your giving us the opportunity to share some information with you this evening. I will be brief. Thank you for moving us up. I'm going to share with you a couple of pictures. There is one slide that basically covers all the information that the Mayor just covered. I know that you have a letter from us requesting the de-annexation process. There is an attachment to that letter that provides you a map showing where the current boundary shared between Mission and Roeland Park lies. That's basically the red line, and there is a line shown on that map in green. Yep, that depicts the proposed new shared boundary. And I'll just touch on two things real quick. The Mayor did a good job of pointing out the benefits of having a single approval process for the development of the site and how that is beneficial to both the communities. I've also attached a map called Most Likely Development Layout. And we consider this the most likely development layout because of unique elements on the site. And those include underground utilities. There's an existing underground sanitary sewer, an existing underground storm sewer, an existing underground electric vault. It's a concrete structure, and it's located in the corner. You can see on that map it's a square. But basically, the first dashed line that you see running across the southwest corner of the property, that's the boundary of the sanitary sewer easement. And that was a requirement to be provided to Johnson County Wastewater in order for the sanitary sewer, that is the line parallel to that dashed line, to be built. So that was actually just constructed, as was the storm sewer. That is the next parallel line to the southwest. So we've got some improvements that have already been completed that occupy that southwest corner of this lot. And they provide the opportunity to make this property more buildable, but they will not likely be relocated out of this location. So being able to move the building further to the south is hindered by the fact that there are existing utilities already in that corner. The next attachment is the existing utilities on site. The red is existing overhead power, the green is existing sanitary sewer, and blue is existing water line. So you can see that we have quite a bit of utility relocation just to get the property to be more buildable. And to give you an idea of what we hope to accomplish, and this wouldn't necessarily be the city moving forward with these utility relocations. It likely would occur as part of a site development. This last utility relocation plan gives you basically in red the potential alignments for power, whether it be an overhead relocation or an underground relocation. And you can see that the existing sanitary sewer and overhead power are X through. That indicates that they've been relocated. There's a green line on the west or left side of the map that shows where the future gravity sanitary sewer would be located. So there are the utility issues that make it difficult to build upon the southern portion of this property. And then there is one other fairly substantial hurdle. This property at one time was part of state right-of-way. And though the city has acquired that portion of state right-of-way through a quitclaim deed, we do not have clear title to the property. So in order to convey all of this ground to a future developer, we aren't certain that we will be able to do that. We're certain we will be able to provide clear title on the northern portion of the property. But that portion which was part of the right-of-way and is, if you go back to that first map, there is a gray line that parallels the red line, that red line being the shared corporate limits boundary. That gray line is basically where the northern part of the property that was conveyed to the city from KDOT exists. So if we can't provide transfer of ownership of that southerly property with a clear title, a developer will be less likely to build a structure on it. They'll be more inclined to use it as a parking. It limits their exposure. Happy to answer any other questions you might have.
I had a couple of questions. First, so I don't think we got really any history on this in our packet of why, if it was in Mission, it was conveyed to Roeland Park in the first place, or why something wasn't worked out at that point in time.
Sure, great question. So the city of Roeland Park has owned the northern portion of the property for, I'm not sure for how long. When the Clover lease were abandoned, the city of Roeland Park received ownership of that property, and that being the bulk of the ground, adding to that bulk the unused KDOT right-of-way makes the most sense. It makes the land more buildable.
And then my other question was, so the current drawing proposal shows a 3-story mixed-use development, and I might be getting my Roeland Park parcels confused because I don't follow that closely, but is this the same spot where a strip mall, a 1-story strip mall was proposed that was rejected by the council in the past year?
It is.
So if we de-annex it, then Roeland Park can build whatever they want on that parcel, right?
No.
No?
Let me jump in there, because we knew that would be one of the questions. So as we've talked about it, thinking about what would our concerns or what questions or issues might we have as a city, and I think impact or input into what would be developed on that corner is certainly was top of the list. And as we worked through, starting back in 2014, we had originally a committee or a group that was council members from both communities, planning commission members from both communities, staff from both communities, talking about part of that vision, trying to work through that, and trying to accomplish many of these same things through interlocal agreements. As we've talked with both the City of Roeland Park's attorney and our land use attorney, Pete Heaven, I think there are some opportunities as we move forward in this process to control some of that, or to have some ability to provide input so that it could potentially wouldn't be just a strip mall down the future. So we can certainly explore those in more detail.
So that would be one point that would just be discussed as the process goes forward, as well as the property tax revenue sharing. And then my other question is, because I don't fully understand how the interlocal agreements work, would we have to commit to de-annexation before all of those pieces are figured out?
No, we would do it at the same time, simultaneously, yes. And I think coordination and timing, so the de-annexation process, as I understand it, is relatively simple. Probably the biggest piece is wanting to make sure that we get the timing of us giving it over and them accepting it coordinated most effectively. And I don't think it's a particularly long process, and I know that we have talked with Mayor Kelly and Mr. Moody about Roeland Park, as I understand it, would be willing to assume the costs associated with that de-annexation, which we think would probably be in the neighborhood of about $7,500 or so. So not tremendous cost. And we've had conversations about de-annexation over the years. And I think they've done a good job of sort of outlining many of the points and the benefits of trying to move that forward and accomplish that development in a way that meets all of our objectives.
Are there particular things that derailed those conversations before that we should be concerned about still? No. Okay.
I think that one of the advantages of this particular de-annexation is it doesn't affect anybody's address. Neither a business nor a resident's address would be affected by this de-annexation. I might add a little to the question of what might be there. Roeland Park has spent a lot of time looking at highest and best use. What do we want this intersection, which is the main entryway into our community, to say about our community? And so concepts that haven't met with those preferences have been thanked, and we've moved on. But what we have learned through that process is if you're wanting to attract a mixed-use, vertical mixed-use development, you are likely going to be asked for some assistance to make that come about. And I think that you guys have seen that here in the City of Mission recently. And so that realization and then discussions with developers about, well, this is a piece of property which has the potential for dual approvals of those incentives because it's in two different cities. That process is, it becomes a hurdle for them. It's a concern that they have because they're going to spend dollars going through those approval processes with two agencies versus one. So, we see that the timing is good, and there is a critical mass that this piece of property being developed in concert with the Gateway property can make this more of a regional draw, and what's good for the City of Mission is good for the City of Roeland Park.
What's the size of that footprint? I'm just curious.
The total acreage, I cut it off, I'm sorry. It was on this plan, but in order to get it as big as I could.
2.7.
Okay.
And
Thank
so
you.
is the fairway portion in the southeast corner, is that where Fairway's piece is?
So Fairway's piece is almost cut off on this map, but it's here. It's this little, we've always kind of referred to it as the thumb. That's the piece that's in Fairway.
So are you having a similar process with Fairway as well?
We haven't acquired that piece of property. The conveyance of the KDOT right-of-way went up to the existing corporate limits with Fairway and stopped there. There isn't a lot of buildable space in the thumb, and adding a third agency to the discussion wasn't necessarily.
Well, and I think that piece of it was, honestly, KDOT said they would not be willing, and it took us, we started as this task force, what, 2+ years to really almost wind our way through KDOT and get to the point where we could really understand whether they were willing or how they might convey that. And so they retained, as I understand it, this section, correct, as right-of-way. So they were not willing to turn that portion over. So it was just this portion, and then they were also not willing to convey that piece that's in the City of Fairway.
One question, a little off topic of this. It mentions that Roeland Park's looking to pay half the annual cost of the traffic signal, or the Roeland Park would take on half the annual cost of that traffic signal. If I'm not mistaken, when you look at the map, isn't half of that traffic signal in Roeland Park?
Currently, there's one of the 4 poles in the City of Roeland Park.
Really? The other one is on what, KDOT property or?
Correct.
And currently Roeland Park pays for none of it.
Correct.
So you don't pay us for the pole you have?
Oh my goodness.
We do. We do.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Has there been any, is there any interest, has any vendors come forward that are interested in developing the property? Like Walmart or apartment complexes or office complexes or hotels or anything?
We've spoken to a number, of developers. And we've yet to move to a purchase agreement stage. They have concepts, they'll talk about those, and we give them our feedback, but we haven't had somebody say, we're ready to buy.
Thank you.
I think to add to that, as far as any kind of like big box retail be concerned, I don't think that land is nearly big enough to support that. So.
I've got two questions, if I may. How long has this been a non-revenue generating property?
Well, I don't know that it has ever generated revenue for either community. It was part of the cloverleaf design before, so prior to that, I presume it was farmed out.
With the lack of green space in that area, is there any consideration of following Roeland Park's precedent in establishing new green space?
I was
Is
just
there
going to
any
ask
thought on that?
It is something that we've asked in our citizen satisfaction surveys, what would you like to see at this intersection? The majority of the responses have favored additional job opportunities, good paying jobs, additional living choices, and there have been some that expressed an interest in additional green space. But the majority of those were interested in seeing the property developed in providing for additional living or job choices.
Has Pete haven't weighed in on this, Laura?
Weighed in what? I mean, it's doable. I mean, the process is doable, and he would work with us to develop the ordinances as we went through that process, and any of the other documents that would establish our roles and responsibilities through the process.
I apologize if I missed it. Was there a percentage breakdown of the portion of land owned by each city or not?
Well, so we don't own any of the land, right? It's
within
just
our boundary, sorry.
Within. I think you said a points. If I heard you correctly, 0.7 acres.
2.7 acres, but how much?
I know, but I think you said 0.7 is the portion that's.
All right. Well, I can find a calculator.
Laura, are there any other similar instances of both having a say in what would be built there and the revenue sharing? Like, are there any other properties in the area similar to this? Or are we kind of starting from scratch?
We are kind of starting from the beginning. We have some interlocal agreements that deal more with responsibilities for enforcement of property maintenance codes and sign codes and other things as we look at some properties that straddle Johnson County, Wyandotte County lines on the north side of I-35 in particular. It's just not particularly common.
Yeah,
and that's kind of, if we go all the way back to the 2014 process, there was just a lot of, this de-annexation would simplify some of that because you aren't then passing ordinances and creating a variety of interlocal agreements. And I think originally when we started this, that Keith is absolutely right, the discussion about the use of incentives, in Roeland Park, I think it's fair to say, held fairly firm initially that there wasn't an interest in using incentives, for the property. As they continued their conversations and that became somewhat evident that that was going to be part of the conversation, we also explored, can we create an interlocal agreement that would allow us to, and we can sort of give away our zoning authority. We can't give away our ability to approve the incentive. So there was no workaround in that sense to an incentive approval process that straddled two city boundaries. That would then have to go to, well, there was, but it would require the county commission to be involved in that, and we didn't feel like that was probably a reasonable request to make of the county commission. So that's when we started kind of exploring and talking about what other opportunities might we have to simplify and assist in their redevelopment efforts.
So what are the next steps?
I think if we're looking for direction for us to continue the conversation with Roeland Park and bring back to you that process and some formal recommendations related to de-annexation.
I would like to compare and contrast. I'd like the benefits for de-annexation for us.
Okay.
I mean, I think it seems pretty clear that that land isn't even really that usable without incentives. No, I know. I'd like to see what some of the options could be, but I think it's definitely worth reviewing that.
Yeah, I think so.
Personally, I'd like to see move forward. See if we can come up to some agreement there, because otherwise, not much else is going to
Okay,
happen.
so Keith and I'll talk, and maybe I'll be able to report back next week at the, kind of a timeline or what we expect that might look like.
Again, thank you all for your time. Thank you to staff for getting us on your agenda.
Sorry, it takes so long.
I picked a doozy of it, you know.
Checks one off and they all just.
So do you want to go back to finance and?
Sure.
Okay.
Unless you want to get Brent, item 36.
Brent can hang out with us. Brent stays right there. One of us. Poor Brent. One of us. Not poor Brent, are you kidding me? Very, very lucky.
Are we good to move on?
Are we doing the legislative agenda?
All right, yep, so number 14 is discussion item on 2019 legislative priorities.
So this was typically each year in January, we will bring back a legislative priority or legislative program for the city of Mission that the council will adopt. And then we can use throughout the course of the year in communicating with our legislators what our priorities might be. Typically, at this point in our process, we have also been participating with the other cities in Johnson County and the county government on a joint city-county legislative program that often forms much of the basis for that. And the county usually facilitates that conversation. We have not had that. It's just kind of starting now, so we're a little bit behind in terms of where we would be typically, and they haven't circulated a draft of what those items would be. So I know that Councilmember Flora had asked if there would be an opportunity for input into our 2019 legislative program, and so we included the League Statement of Municipal Policy in your packet, put it on as a discussion item tonight so that if there are specific legislative issues or policies that you would like to see incorporated in the city's 2019 program, if you can let us know, then we will work to bring this back to you in January.
Tax lid.
Do we want to discuss any of those now, or do we just want, do you want us to send them?
I think you can do some, I mean, I think it's up to you how you want to handle that, but.
Well, I looked through this, and when I compared last year's list, and then I looked at what we have in the 2019, it looks like they've reorganized the way in which it's presented. They've got the first part, which is just their action agenda, which is on the first page, and then they have a number of new items that have been included. The protection of First Amendment, I'm not sure what that is about. And then the alternative property valuation, budget timeline. They have then under finance taxations, they have alternative property valuation again. The budget timeline, which I guess are two issues with regards to how they changed the election process.
No, the budget timeline is really one that just is trying to, as we've advanced and are more technologically savvy, that we try to provide cities more time over the course of the year to put a budget together. So right now, we have to have budgets fully adopted and certified to the county by August 25th of each year. This, if you read it, we would have to certify tax levies by August 25th, but we would still have through November 30th to put our budget together. So if there are other programs or things that we wanted to explore, you would have just that additional window of time to accomplish that.
Does that alternative property valuation, does that have to do with dark store?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's just some of the fights that have occurred about how particularly big box retailers are being valued, and that you may have heard of the dark store theory. Yes, that's absolutely what's driving that position on alternative.
Participation in the federal loan program. This is a new one. Then expanded gaming, and that those are going to be.
But those will all go in the league priorities.
Yeah, so those all.
Yeah, so the question is, which ones, I don't think gaming, but which ones of these would be relevant to the city?
Well, I think the first one, you've got the, whatever the first subtitle is, the finance and taxation. I mean, except for the EMS, hospital funding, I don't think we have anything to do with that, right?
The ones we did last year were the tax repeal, right?
Right.
The sales tax exemption, the policy, tax policy.
I mean, I think probably the more efficient way to look at it is, I mean, if there are things specific to the league's policy statement that we fundamentally disagree with, it's probably better to call that out, or then we can sort of just say, in general, we support the league's statement of municipal policy. We have really built, if you look at the rest of our legislative programs over the years, I mean, we haven't had very active involvement in communicating with our legislators over the course of the year. So we've kind of put it together, and then it hasn't seen a lot of activity over the course of the year. So we have tended in the joint city-county program to really focus on those things, the tax lid issues, some things that are really do apply more generally to all of us, regardless of the size of our city or the operation in our city. So
there's one item I had some questions about, and it's really in line with the league's position on it, but it's regarding city elections and making city elections remain nonpartisan and keeping them separate from state and national level elections and the fundraising efforts and everything that go along with that.
That was in our last year one.
And I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion by any cities about potentially moving the election cycle back to being off cycle from the other.
I don't think we can because it's state law.
So there's no home rule thing there that could come into play just for municipal specific positions?
You can't exempt yourself out of it.
So that would be something the league would basically have to work on with the state at that point.
What about doing something about, you know, like what we're trying to do with the NDO? I mean, I think that might be relevant to add, perhaps.
Yeah.
And again, tobacco 21.
Yeah, or just tobacco prevention in general.
Right. And since we've had a lively discussion on those, I mean, I think that we've all kind of wanted the state to have some involvement in that as well.
The others that I thought would be big, and I had both those on my list, would be the league had updated anything on internet sales tax collections, and I think that'll be really important, making sure that the city would continue on any new revenue to get our portion. The dark store theory, I think that's potentially really important.
And then another thing though, what about like, you know, exempting food sales tax? I mean, I don't know, especially if we get this.
Yeah. Or I think just asking the state to address the food sales tax.
Right.
I think that is sort of goes food and
I know, I mean, a lot of.
To exempt it, so the position would be,
we don't want tax on food. We don't want sales tax.
Especially if we get the internet sales tax, we might be able to offset.
State sales tax or local sales tax?
State.
Well, we want
to keep the local.
Be careful about the
Or we could change it on our own, but I know the position would be, that we would like to see the state do away with the
careful about the
sales
local.
tax. The state level food sales. And another thing we've had kind of ongoing conversations about with the co-responder program, et cetera, is I think putting in something about mental health or support for human services programming in general would be a really good thing.
That's what they keep.
Right, and so saying that we think that's a bad idea, and instead they should be supporting those services, because I think that's a place where we're seeing real impact in our community.
We all seem to have a lot of priorities that we'd like to push forward with this. I guess I don't know from a procedural standpoint if we would almost need a separate meeting to discuss that further, or
That might be good.
you know, I don't know how much staff can really work to push any of this stuff forward without already trying to leverage the stuff that's going on with the league anyway.
Well, I mean, my position would be, and others might feel differently, would be that our starting point would be, we have last year's city agenda, that any of us email Laura if there's anything we think should come out that's like not worthy of inclusion this year, and then any of these topics that we think should be added.
But what's the outcome?
Well, I think we should be more active in advocating with our state reps as well.
I'd like to see us set something up with our state reps.
Yeah.
Like in Shawnee, they have where council actually presents what their
agenda
is to their state legislators that represent their district. I think doing something similar to that with our council would make sense.
If you're going to prioritize things, I would hate to go to a meeting like that and say, here are 37 priorities for this year for you. You know, that's.
I mean, isn't that the point of this?
do you want anything to ever get done though? Like, that's the problem, right? If our goal is to come up with the really key focused things that we want to try to really push to the state reps, I think that's a great conversation to have. If we want to go back and say that we've got 40 things we want you to look at.
Well, maybe we don't have 40 things. I think that's,
Well,
that's part of your mention that we should get together and narrow down what our
Sure, maybe that's what we're getting at.
Well, and I think some other cities in the county maybe put together, so they may have a longer list, but they will identify perhaps what their top 3 to 4 priorities are in any particular
Maybe that's what I'm getting at, right?
session.
To have, as a group, come up with a consensus of what our key 3 to 5 priorities maybe would be.
Right.
And try to set up something with our state reps and present.
Yeah, I like that.
We feel strongly about.
That's perfect.
Because just saying that we sign on and agree with the league doesn't really do anything. It's nice, but it doesn't really, there's no concrete stuff.
So I'll send out attached to one email, last year's legislative program and the state municipal policy for 2019 again, so you've got them easily accessible in one spot. I think then, what Sully has suggested is if there's anything you want to see come out or specifically added in, email me and we'll get started kind of working on that. Bring you
It would make sense to put like a survey of the council together to say, identify your top 3 or top 5 priorities and see what shakes out.
After we have our big list, maybe, then we could send them all out and we could say, these are our top ones.
What'd be nice is if we had some common ones with the rest of the county.
Well,
the county
that's
would
what
in
the
as
county
one.
the county does do that. They have their own program and lobbyists.
I mean, on behalf of the county cities.
Yeah, they do that. That exists, but they just haven't started the process yet this year, right?
Right.
But theoretically,
I think they're going to do it. The problem is because most of the cities are trying to get their legislative programs adopted before the session kicks into gear in January. And so typically, I don't know. I mean, with the holidays, I haven't seen anything. I asked the question as we started to look at ours. Have I missed a meeting? Did I get dropped off of an email list somewhere? And we haven't started that process. So I think ultimately there will be, and I think it's important with some of the changes that we've had in legislators, both here and throughout the county, in terms of, communicating and establishing those lines of communication.
I just think if we don't narrow it down to a focused, 3 to 5 things, then you end up with a Parks and Rec study that says we have 27 top priorities and none of them are done. And that's a realistic example of something we've dealt with like that.
I think including the longer list, but then identifying, having the list, and then we as a council do a poll or whatever, and vote on our top 3 to focus on, and the plan would be if we have a meeting with our legislators, that is what we would discuss, but then we would give them, the whole package.
Right, all of the other stuff.
Sure,
still very
we
important.
support these, but we really care about these 3 to 5 things.
So I think when I send that out, I'll put some time frames, ask you to respond back. Whoever's responded back, that will create the list that generates the survey about identifying your top priorities. So that will be the incentive to get your stuff back.
All right,
Great. So you want these by when?
She's going to send it.
I don't know, I'm about to sit down and look at a calendar tomorrow before I send out the email. I have to look at the agenda packet timing and all
Laura
that.
does have to make this decision at 9:45 at night. Great.
Unless there's anything else, I think we can move on from that. And the last thing on our agenda for this committee meeting is for department updates.
We dare you. Nope, I'm good.
All right.
Well, let's go ahead and close our Finance and Administration Committee meeting. Thanks so much for everyone.
Does anybody need a break?
What do you bet was a wreck?
All right, good. Okay.
You stay any longer, we'll have to charge you rent.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and call to order the Community Development Committee meeting at 9:45 or so, 41. First item we have is the GBA task order for Recreation Channel improvements. Larson.
Yes, so as we talked about earlier on the Finance and Admin Committee agenda, we are at that point where we are getting serious about moving forward with the Rock Creek Channel improvements from Roeland Drive to just east of Nall behind the former bowling alley. As we know, this is currently on a list of approved projects for Johnson County SMAC. But we are at the bottom of the list currently. So we got on the list in for 2019, but there are projects totaling $44+ million and about $12 million of SMAC funds that can be allocated across projects. So do the math about where you are. I don't think we'll rise to the top. Our guess is we will not be moving up to get SMAC funding in 2020. But we're still on the list for that. So we had the resolution setting the public hearing on the CID on finance and administration. And one of the things that we've been doing is moving forward a design for the project. So in your packet, you actually have 2 different task orders. And I'm not sure that we're ready to make a final decision on that. We'll talk about some other factors here. But essentially what you have are 2 task orders, because we will have to make a decision relatively quickly about whether or not we're going to proceed with a smaller version of the project to the tune of just under $1 million, which would include the Roeland Court, improvements on private property, and reinforcement of that portion of the channel that is immediately adjacent to those private improvements that were being made, or whether we want to look at our ability to take on the larger project, potentially without SMAC funds, to get that accomplished. I think, as we've talked about in the past, some of the challenges that we see as we talk with the engineers or we think about that is what's the integrity of the investment, the improvements that we would be making on a smaller project if we are then waiting 2 or 3 years before we come back throughout the rest of the channel and add the additional retaining walls, some of those kinds of things. And I think, as the engineers have said, and we've talked very openly with the HOA about, we don't know. I mean, we don't know what erosion will continue. We don't know all of those things that might happen. So one of the things, so we have 2 task orders. We have one that would contemplate the bigger project, including the Roeland Court improvements, and then you see, so that was option 2. Option 1 in the packet involves the design and construction inspection for that more limited project. And so you're looking at the difference between, I think, $192,000 and $694,500. So fairly big difference in scope. The design costs associated with the Roeland Court portion have been accounted for in the calculations of their community improvement district. So they would be contributing to design as well as construction moving forward. So one of the things that I've been working on in the interim is working with Bruce Kimmel, our financial advisor, to say, if we were to look at, we know we can't cash flow what is essentially a $5.2 million project now when you add the Roeland Court piece into it. So what ability might we have? What does it do in our stormwater program if we were to consider issuing debt to move that forward and not take advantage of the SMAC fund? So again, lots more conversation surrounding the financing, but we wanted to kind of lay out for you 2 options that we've been playing with to get some additional feedback and direction, and then we can go back and fine-tune this a little bit. So at the top, on one side, you will see Stormwater Program Plan 2019 through 2029. Let's look at the 3.5, and it should say million, not mission, in net bond proceeds on a 10-year level amortization. So when we start this process of looking at debt, we really try to look at level debt service payments over no longer than a 10-year horizon, if at all possible. So when we originally ran that scenario, I plugged those numbers into the CIP. You can see what happens at the bottom. So you'll see at the bottom of the page, you're going to see an annual surplus or deficit, so you can kind of see what's happening with our stormwater funds in any particular year, and then cumulatively what's happening to an ending fund balance over a period of time. So you can see, if we essentially replace the SMAC funds with net bond proceeds, we've got this period from 2020 through 2023 where we're essentially upside down in our stormwater fund and our stormwater CIP. as I was talking with Bruce, he said, let's look at this, let's run this scenario out through 2029, which is when our existing stormwater debt will pay off in its entirety. He said, because as we've structured existing stormwater debt, I think, you know, are we talking about kind of a rabbit and a python situation, and then things get much better as we move towards those out years? Really, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? So as you can see, when we just played that out with the $3.5 million in net bond proceeds, you can see that after 2023, the situation gets much better. So we get into a positive cash flow situation. So that caused us to then, if you flip it over to the other side, what can we do? Well, stay on that side for a minute, because if you look at those numbers, you know, 200,000 or so really in 2021 and 2022. The one thing that we didn't do at this point was adjust anything else on the expense side or the revenue side. So how do we close that gap? Do we increase stormwater utility fees? I think we're pretty, I mean, we can always consider that, but $1 per month per ERU generates $90,000 a year for us. So you would be looking, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of at least $2. If you were going to do it all through increase in stormwater utility fees, we'd be looking somewhere between a $2 per month increase in ERU. We also have started building into the stormwater CIP in the current plan a repair and maintenance fund to the tune of about $250,000. That wasn't something that we had the flexibility to do in the past, but we've had to continue to pay for. As a sinkhole appears, we're dipping into fund balance or reserves to cover those kinds of things. We know that sinkholes will continue to appear. In fact, Brent brought one to me this week, so we're looking at proposals. So we hated to start sort of tinkering with that fund, but certainly there's some opportunity there on an annual basis. Yes?
I did have one question about that related to the model. So our entire stormwater infrastructure isn't getting any younger, but this has the same maintenance budget through 2031. Do we think that's actually realistic?
No, but we don't know.
A model that projects somewhat upward when we're thinking about it.
We certainly could. I think it's hard to do that, and we can maybe look at some trend, but I think it's hard to do that. Okay. You know, one of the things, if you look at in 2019, and on the miscellaneous engineering side, you see $150,000. And if you'll recall back to our budget conversations, we increased that engineering amount so that we could really do an asset inventory on the stormwater side. And the goal of that would be to really help us identify, prioritize, and quantify what those needs are. So, yes, I mean, your point is absolutely valid and well taken. It's just we don't have good data at this time to estimate that. So that's something that could certainly, we can't obviously impact the debt service. There really are no restructuring, refinancing opportunities in the existing stormwater debt. So then we start looking at, if you would then flip to the other side, which is just a slight increase in net bond proceeds. I think that's potentially a legitimate consideration, not only because of the gap financially that we would be trying to close, but because we've added essentially $343,000 in cost to the overall project with the addition of the Roeland Court piece. So we're trying to be as conservative and look at what if we just replace the SMAC dollars for the project that didn't originally contemplate that. And then starting to increase that slightly to account for that portion as well. The one thing I didn't point out at the top on the revenue side on both sheets is you will see about $17,910 each year in revenues. Those would be the CID revenues coming in from the Roeland Court Homes Association. And those would actually extend out another 10 years past the life of the 2031 plan that you see here. So there's some additional, there's about another $180,000 of revenue that would still be coming in. So we looked at two things in kind of increasing the net bond proceeds by $500,000, and then what Bruce refers to as sort of shaping the amortization so that we get a little bit creative in a couple of years to kind of manage the cash flow. So you'll look and see if you go to the bottom line, the Series 2019A general obligation bonds, you would see that we would make an interest-only payment in 2020, which is $163, and then we would pick up with principal and interest payments in 2021. And that does extend us out one additional year into the last debt service payment would be made in 2030. But you can kind of see that really what that does is it leaves us with essentially $163,000 problem to solve in year 2022. And I think there are a variety of ways by the time we got there to potentially look at that.
And you mentioned if we were to change the stormwater fees by about $1 a month, it's $90,000.
About $90,000. $1 per ERU, $1 per month generates about $90,000 in stormwater revenue. Now, I think the other thing that we haven't accounted for here, and it's a little bit difficult to do, is I think we will see an increase in drainage district revenues as the gateway comes online. So as that site and the 10 mills that are associated with the drainage district on the gateway site increases, we may see some increase in that dollar amount that's indicated on the revenue line. So really, the goal this evening was to just kind of start to present this. There's some additional, I think, things that we could look at in terms of how we might structure this. I think both Bruce and I would be hesitant in extending out any longer than this. I mean, the other option is do you take it out 15 years or 20 years, and I think our debt policy and our approach has been to really try to retire any debt that we bring on as quickly as we possibly can. And I think, I think what you see is that there is in the out years, once we kind of get through that initial 2021 to 23 horizon, there's an opportunity for us to then really look at and seriously consider other major improvements. I mean, there are dollars available in the Stormwater Utility Fund. What Bruce and I haven't talked about is early call provisions or other things that if we're going to proceed down this path, we can spend obviously more time looking at, how could we potentially structure a debt issue so that if you wanted to, and the revenues would allow for it, you could use the excess funds to retire your debt early or do some of those other kinds of things. So we can certainly look at some of those provisions. Early call provisions will bump up your interest rates a little bit, but we have looked at those in almost every debt issue that we've done in the time that I've been here.
So is the action item that's on here has no budget at this point? It's just to move forward on a project?
No, the action item actually has a budget, and so that's, in the CIP it was shown as $692,000, so you're $2,000 off of if we authorize the big one. So the action item is really authorizing a task order with GBA. And I do have a question out to GBA, which I didn't have an answer for before I came in here tonight. Is there some way to start moving this forward now so we don't lose time? The biggest challenge for them is which plan set are we going to take to bid when we get to the the final piece of this. So is it, and they don't want to duplicate that effort. So I was hoping to have a response from them at that point, and so what we may need to do is just advance both contracts forward to your committee agenda next week. We have to proceed with the design. We know we need to move forward with the design, even if we leave the larger project as a SMAC project. We still need to move forward with that design in the very near term. But we can continue to kind of talk, I think, in January as well, if you have some feedback or some other things or some initial reactions to an appetite for continuing to talk about the larger project, we can put some more information around that and bring that back to you in January, which is the same time at which you would be considering establishment potentially of that community improvement district. So we still keep everything kind of lined up and moving forward together.
It seems that it makes sense to do the whole project at one time, not to do it piecemeal.
Yeah, I'm leaning that way too.
So if we can, I think let's see if we can get the funding approach that is being suggested.
The other thing that I did, and I know Sally, you had a question, but the other thing that I did is I reached out to the folks at SMAC and said, let me get through this initial conversation with the council this evening, and then I'd like to come out and sit down and see, is there any way, I mean, if we now have what appears to be this cooperative solution with the Community Improvement District and all of those things, are there any considerations that we could have in terms of moving this project up the priority list, or maybe we wouldn't be eligible for $3.5 million of SMAC, but is there anything that we might take advantage? And so I have reached out to Kent Lage, and I'll go out before the end of the year and sit down and talk with him about those opportunities.
I think that'd be great, and I think if you could add into that conversation, if we could substitute different projects without losing our spot. I think we had talked about that before, so that we wouldn't basically just be leaving money on the table by...
And we don't have, I looked at that, we don't have another project. So the next project that we have talked about submitting to SMAC, and we don't have it on the list yet, would be for the interceptor associated with the next phase of Johnson Drive reconstruction.
Okay.
And I believe that's in 2025. So it's in the last year of the 5-year CIP, and so there's really not, we don't have that ability. That's kind of where we started looking, but we don't have enough projects on the SMAC list to flip, to flip-flop them.
And remind me, what is the SMAC participation?
So it's 75-25. So we pay 25%, they pay 75%.
We don't have a good concept at this point what the inventory of other cities' needs are for the next year either, do we? For SMAC purposes.
Or knows what spot we are on the list.
Well, we do. We have a list of all of the projects that are currently approved and higher on the list than we are. So we can get that list.
40 million.
$45 million in total.
Requests on the list, and 12 million get approved per year.
I mean, I think to move forward in
3 or 4 years
an
away.
informed way, I think it's good to keep the design moving forward, but in terms of which project option, I think we really need the answers from the meeting. So I'm glad you have that set.
Yes, Barb, I think Barb.
Could we point out that the part of course I'm a resident of Roeland Court, the part that is the CID is only covering 10 of 20 homes. So the importance of doing the SMAC project would cover the rest of the homes, going further west, all the way to the bowling alley, and also the Mission parking lot is also.
Yeah, the Mission Bank parking lot.
So I didn't know if you already knew any of that, but I thought we should point it out.
I think it's clear that something needs to be done over there.
Right, and I think that's the other piece, and I think that there is also the opportunity, I mean, the MD Management who owns the Mission Bank building, I think there may be an opportunity for them to participate financially as well for some of the improvements on that section. So if it does look like we're really going to move forward with that larger project, we'll go back to them as well and pick up on those initial conversations. But you know what I fear is and would like to see us avoid is just going in and building a wall here, a wall here, a wall here, and in that regard. Right.
And then that one house, is that the house that we would buy out? Is that the house that we went?
So the house that's shown in the preliminary engineering study as the buyout is not actually the one that we would probably buy out. So that is not Brad Casey's house. And we've talked with George Butler, and we'll have them change that in the plans. We just haven't spent the time to show that differently in that preliminary engineering study. That we need to acquire a piece of property so that we can get the equipment in on that side of the creek because of this, as you know, that significant grade difference on that south side of the creek, and so it provides access. And so we asked the question over a year ago, does it matter? Can we gain the same access because we think we have someone who's probably more interested in selling their property. And so we would, as we move forward, we would flip-flop, that process. But that's why we have to buy anything. We can't, when we've looked at is there any way to do it without having to buy anybody's home, but we can't make that happen.
And that's an additional project cost that's not...
That's included, actually that's included, I believe, in the total project cost.
Okay. Do you need anything from us before you go talk?
Any other feedback? I mean, reactions initially to, do you want to, we can kind of continue, do you want us to focus a little bit more on refining a shaped scenario? I mean, the other thing we can do is I can look at going back to $3.5 million in bond proceeds, and we didn't shape that one, we shaped the $4 million bond proceed. So we can go back and shape both of those. That will extend that first one out probably a couple of years longer, you know, because of, we're just going to have to stretch that out if we look at an interest-only payment. So it's not that difficult to play with this. So we can kind of continue to build out, put some more detail around both of these scenarios if that would be something you'd like to see.
I think knowing any impact on the bond rating and stuff would be helpful too.
Okay.
Laura, just curious, if we did move forward with the larger project, what's the timeline for it? Is there any guess?
So, and I'll ask this question specifically, but when we've talked about design time frames on the smaller project, GBA has indicated they're about 90 days to get through the design process and before we would move to bidding. We might extend it a little bit longer than that if we take on the whole project, but I don't think it would have to be, you know, much longer than a 90-day design window. And then you're going to be into bidding. But I mean, as we've talked with Roeland Court, you know, we're looking at fall and into winter before we would be able to start the construction on that, because you're going to go, you know, you have to go through the design process. We'll have to go through, as we acquire property, we'll go through an appraisal process to look at that property acquisition. And many of these things can happen simultaneously. I think we may need to acquire some additional easements on the north side of the creek. I think we acquired several years ago what we needed on the south side, but I think there's some additional easement acquisition that will be required on the north side. So we're best case on either big project or little project, looking at starting probably late in, you know, early fall, late into 2019.
Does the larger project delay addressing the current properties that subside?
No, because we can start, and we've talked with GBA about if we end up doing a larger project, where would we start, and if we start at that end, and it doesn't really matter which direction we work in this instance. So we could certainly start at that end.
Are there any environmental challenges to the Rock Creek redevelopment that we might seek environmental grants for?
We can look, I'll ask GBA. I mean, I know we'll have to do specific permitting to do the work in the creek channel, but I don't know what other grant or funding partnership opportunities there might be, but we can certainly look at that. So at this point, I think I would just recommend that we leave both task orders on. We'll just leave both task orders as options for the meeting agenda next week. And maybe we'll be able to answer that question, or at least kind of keep that moving forward.
Date of consent?
No. Non-consent.
One meeting next week, too.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next action item, the mission project.
Yes. So this is actually Jenny Smith at the Community Center was kind of the impetus behind this. As you know, we've had long-term agreements over the last couple of years with a number of churches and with the Stroke Foundation for ongoing use of the facility, and those arrangements have been very, very successful. We've been in conversation with the Mission Project recently about trying to do something similar. They've got some grant funds that are available to them to help with some fitness programs, and they really have been looking to find a location that can accommodate their needs that's closer to home. So where they're going now with their participants requires them to coordinate transportation, which is often a challenge, and so they've got some fitness equipment and some fitness space in their offices, but they really have outgrown that. And in looking at trying to just increase the overall health and wellness, they thought maybe moving to the community center would be, a good fit. And that's been certainly a part of their model as they've built their programs and services in Mission over the years. So they would be looking we would offer annual memberships to up to 31 of their participants. 2 of those would be offered to staff members. And then we would offer a series of classes, a minimum of, I always get this, six specific classes, and I think there's 7 days a week. So I always got that confused from the agreement. But they would pay the current annual individual rate for the annual memberships, and then they would pay a fee for the classes, and then an administrative fee just for our reporting and record keeping and other things associated with the facilities. We would currently, there are 12 of their participants who have purchased memberships to our community center, so we would be increasing that number, more than doubling that number, and then providing the classes. And we have done some classes with them in the past, but these would really be very specific to their members. They would send a staff person to each of the classes, so they wouldn't necessarily, every time a member maybe came to use the facility, they wouldn't necessarily have a staff person with them, but there would certainly be a staff person. Is their intent to provide the staff person with the classes so that there's that additional resource available. So modeled the agreement after, primarily after the agreement that we have with the Stroke Foundation currently. So when we look at total estimated annual revenues as a result of this agreement, we're looking at about $30,000 that we would be bringing into the community center and strengthening that relationship and partnership that we have with the Mission Project.
I think it's very cool.
Yeah, I like it.
Is there any issue of space use?
No, so they've looked at and analyzed how they can accommodate that before we got too far down the path of negotiating this agreement.
Do we take it to council?
Yes, please.
Consent or non?
Non-consent.
Non-consent.
Well, you can put consent, I just thought it'd be a highlight.
I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, just say non-consent, talk about the partnership.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. All right, next item is a discussion item that we've already done, and so we can skip that. Now Brent is up with the snow plan update.
Oh, we're almost done.
It's almost springtime.
That's right.
Snow's over. Yeah, really close. So with the 2018-2019 snow season plan, I'm sure you've all heard this before, but I'll go through it again. It goes through our first priorities, our second priorities, and then kind of some of our miscellaneous areas we hit as we get caught up through the snowstorm. So I'll kind of touch base on all those areas. Once we know the weather's coming in, the crews get assigned their shift assignments. Try to get ahead of it when we know the weather's coming in. Sometimes we don't. As soon as we know the weather's coming in, we go to basically running 24/7. The guys got a 2-hour call-in window if they're not already at the building on staff. So usually try to have at least one crew leader down at the shop if we know the weather's coming in, just to have eyes in Mission and see what's going on. A lot of the guys live outside the city, so you don't always know what's going on here, and it's good to have somebody on staff down there. So we try to always have somebody on staff, but the guys do have a 2-hour call-in window to show up and start their shift. When we know the storm's coming, everybody's on call. Public Works staff's on call 24/7 the whole year. So, I mean, we don't have to use that very often. They usually know it's coming, but they're on call all the time. We usually run 4 trucks right now. When we're full staff, sometimes there's a 5th truck out there, but right now we're just running 2 4-man crews. It's broken up from Johnson Drive. We've got the north side and south side of Johnson Drive, and then we've got 2 dedicated of the bigger trucks with the 10-foot plow running the main streets. And a lot of that depends on weather. Like this last blizzard kind of condition storm we had, the big trucks will usually run tandems, so we can open up the main thoroughfares a lot quicker. So they're hitting the priorities like Fox Ridge, Lamar, Way,
hills and elevated surfaces and bridge decks first. If it's a light snow, 1 to 2 inches, we'll split them up, just making sure we're hitting all the main drags around town. And then we've got one small truck on the north side of town and one bigger truck on the south side of town. And the only reason we leave the bigger truck on the south side of town is it's more opened up, wider streets, so it's got a lot better shot of getting around and not hitting cars parked on both sides of the streets and stuff like that. So it just works out a lot better. Salt is usually 300 to 500 pounds per lane mile, depending on the storm. I mean, once it drops below 20 degrees, the guys usually put down 1 layer of salt and just let it sit. Once you get more than that down, you're really not doing nothing until sunshine or the temperatures start rising. So you're just pushing it off every time you pass over again. I'm sure everybody knows how salt works, so we don't have to get into that. But Johnson Drive parking spots that we take care of, community center parking lot, city hall parking lot, police department parking lot. A lot of that stuff happens in the evening hours, usually after the 10 or 11 o'clock hour if it works out. Just it opens up all those parking spots. It's safer for the guys to push the stuff. The cars are gone. I mean, you can do U's in Johnson Drive. I mean, it's really limited. Just everybody's out there pushing snow basically at that time of night, so it's a lot safer. So we try to get to it in the evening hours, just depending on the weather. I mean, the streets are our main priority, so I mean, it just trickles down from there. So, but it usually works out in the evening hours when we get to it. We do all the school sidewalks and school zone sidewalks. Usually it's not too high on the priority list because if it's a heavy snow, school's out, so we can usually push that a little bit behind, but sometimes it doesn't, you know, ice or something, we gotta get out there ahead of schedule, but we can usually get somebody on it. I mean, we've got nice equipment, the guys take care of it. We've got a great public works staff. I mean, we tear trucks apart after every storm, spreaders come off, everything gets washed, underneath washed, top to bottom, so we appreciate the nice equipment that you guys let us buy, and we take care of it and keep it clean, so just so you know, we do appreciate all that stuff.
You ever have to move cars?
No, we've never had to move cars. Wow. So usually kind of I know it's been talked about, the hottest planners, but usually that's kind of the more, sometimes that stuff just gets skipped. So if we can't get a truck down there, we're not really into it. I think they realize it, but it's just, if we can't get down there without probably hitting somebody's car or sliding into it, I mean, I think they understand too. I mean, I've had people come out and say, just plow that car in when we're over there when I was plowing. I mean, if you can't get down there, you can't get down there. So you're not knocking on people's doors at midnight or 1 in the morning. So it's just part of it. We try to get to it, you know, the next day or when people start going to work, you know. We usually got trucks out a day or two after the storm, just pushing spots where people's cars were parked along the street during the storm and stuff, just trying to clean everything up. So there's usually a 3-day process or 2-day process after the storm, just making sure we got everything cleaned up. And, you know, we've got some new staff members, but we're getting them all dialed in, and it's going fairly smooth, so I'm happy with all that. You know,
yeah, you guys did a great job.
Thank you. I let all the guys know last time too, so the staff was super appreciative, so thank you very much for that. And I'll just finish with, you know, our #1 streets are basically hills, elevated surfaces, you know, anywhere that we've had problem issues before. You know, Wannaview, Lamar, Fox Ridge, Lincolnshire, off Knoll, where that nursing home is down there, just areas like that. I mean, those are all high priority streets, and the guys know about them. And it's color coded on the maps, which is all available on the website. You guys can take a look at that. But it's basically the same thing every year. You know, we dial it in a little better, I think, every year, but it's a good service we offer, and I think we do a good job at it. And I appreciate all the support. So, do you have any questions?
All right, any questions for Brad?
More than happy to answer. We can end this.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
All right, now we have a department updates by Laura Smith.
One thing, just a reminder that if you are available, I think you were all provided with an invitation to the part-time staff appreciation event at the community center this Sunday, 5:15. So if your schedule allows, you know, they would love to have a chance to visit
at the community.
At the community center.
They said that you had to RSVP by Monday. Is it too late? It's not too late.
No.
Okay.
I'll bring extra potluck for you. You're welcome. Yes?
Well, my street doesn't get it, because there's a whole line of leaves in the street.
Okay.
And all their stuff is on the side. The big trash pickup was last week.
Yeah, what's going on
Sofas out
this
there
week,
and
my
chairs
neighbor
and-
still has mattresses out. It's getting
So we had a
irritating.
meeting today with Waste Management, because we've had issues last week with bulky item collection. So
so they
bulky item
send it in?
collection needs to stay out, so they're going to pick up tomorrow and Friday and Monday and Tuesday.
Oh, Monday and Tuesday is
Yes.
It's on your day.
On your regular day.
Oh, okay,
They're gonna,
okay.
even though we're past that first week, they will continue to get the bulky items cleaned out from the misses that happened.
Okay, is there any other?
And leaves, call, or should we send these locations on the street? I mean,
Because Kim is reporting.
I mean, it was obvious, they took all their leaves and put them in the street.
right.
Do you need me to talk to somebody?
No, but Emily had a tweet or something, you received a tweet or something with a concern about a car that was parked on a sidewalk. That was a while ago.
That happens on Lamar all the time.
But, I think that we've just got to continue to reinforce with our residents, please call. Let us, we can come deal with that.
Just posting on Nextdoor.
Posting on Nextdoor or tweeting about it is not going to get the problem solved, for you. So the sooner we can know about it, the better we can respond when something's happening.
All right, if there's nothing else, then that concludes the CDC meeting at 10.